We have just one speaker. But I'm a little surprised at that, but that's okay. Cindy Ritzy. Hit the little push button on there, and so the green light. It's not a microphone, it's just a recorder, so at this meeting, I'm probably going to be the one people are going to be telling to speak louder, but this is as loud as it gets today.
So
speak so that we all can hear it. And
should I push it to talk?
When you're ready, you'll give you 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, here we go again. My name is Cindy Ritzy. I'm here to represent substitute teachers for MTI as a member of the board of directors. I'm a professional substitute teacher. I've worked in this district for almost 29 years as my full-time job. I work every day. My work is important to the students and teachers I support and care about. I also need the income and health insurance benefits. I approach my job as a professional educator, an employee of the district, but too often that professionalism is not reciprocated. I'm here to request that you pay substitute teachers for snow days, just as you have all other scheduled educators and staff in the district. Those substitute teachers who had jobs scheduled during the recent emergency closures will now lose 5 days of pay and 5 days of work to apply towards health insurance eligibility. This will cost substitute teachers an estimated $700 to $1,000 in lost gross income. All other employees can use earned sick leave, vacation, or make up the lost hours. Substitutes cannot. When the district decided to pay hourly employees for the 3 polar vortex days, this decision was much lauded and appreciated. That is, unless you're a substitute teacher. Furthermore, if you're one of the rare subs who still has sick leave, you can't even use that to make up the pay. Since Act 10, substitute teachers' pay and benefits have eroded considerably. Most sick leave, gone. Access to remaining earned sick leave, more hurdles than the Olympic Games. Qualifying for health insurance benefits is now more difficult. The job is also more challenging than ever. We've lost longevity pay, and now after 29 years of licensed and certified experience, I make the same pay as uncertified permit subs on their first day. Dedicated certified substitute teachers are difficult to find. Those who work the most are most negatively impacted by this loss in pay. The shortage of substitute teachers is a significant disruption to our schools, to classroom teachers, to principals and school secretaries who all scrambled to ensure adequate coverage. Leaving us out of the district's planning or consideration only alienates and does nothing to alleviate the current shortage. The same week that we found out we were the only group of educators not to receive the emergency closure pay, the superintendent sent out a newsletter encouraging recognition of teachers and staff. Nowhere does it recognize or even acknowledge substitute teachers for the contribution we make every day to ensure that schools function continuously, whether it be daily or as a long-term replacement for a teacher on leave. Once again, we ask, treat us with equity, treat us as respected members of this community, not like marginalized cast-offs. We ask that you pay us for the snow days as you have every other scheduled employee in the district. Allow us to use our sick leave and account for these lost days for health insurance eligibility. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your consideration.
Oh, thank you. Chris, you're next.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm here to talk today about a little disconnect on, I guess, what I expected for this update to the board on the 3 major plans that's happening today for special education, English language learning, and advanced learning. I think what's common to all 3 of these plans is what I've seen over the years in the district is that each has issues with building level implementation that which need to be addressed to make the overall work of these departments effective. I guess that's what I expected to see tonight. And instead, what I see in the PowerPoint is a sort of a 10,000-foot overview of district level processes. And I was really hoping to see a ground level view of the current challenges and successes and what needs to be adjusted in each department to serve students better. My metric for success in advanced learning always has been to what degree are advanced learners in grades K to 12 being provided advanced instruction, and especially in areas beyond math. The goal of this is for students to learn something that is new to them every day and to be not taught what they already know over and over. This is not only includes students already advanced, but also those with academic talent potential that have not yet had the same opportunities to develop those skills. Important work and discussions regarding this happened in September through January this year as the Advanced Learning Advisory Committee for the district worked on defining the root causes of disparities in access to and preparation for advanced coursework in high school. As you know, this committee work and its recommendations are part of the requirements of the resolution agreement our district signed in 2016 with the Office for Civil Rights. The first set of 6 recommendations were sent to OCR on December 3rd, and the second set was finished by the group on January 15th. I think this is important for the board and the public to understand, as the district, which hopefully includes the Board of Education, is required to respond to these recommendations and how they will be implemented. There are also other advisory committees. I'm assuming there's one for special education and one for English language learning. Maybe future annual updates, including all the data and student information, could also include direct reports from these committees. I would be interested to know the viewpoint of the community groups of stakeholders who are working together with the district to help problem solve and advise the district in these areas and what they have to say. Thank you. I look forward to the discussion tonight.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, that's all the public comments. We're going to next go into have a potential action item for February, which is the BEP presentation, which we, yeah, I'm sorry, we'll back up and approve some minutes here. It's recommended to approve the minutes from the instruction work group meeting dated September 3rd, 2018. December, what did I say? December 3rd, 2018. I'm sorry, Nikki, did you say? Second. Second, okay. All opposed? Ahmad?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 1 to 5 zip. Okay, that's all the minutes. So we'll start with the BEP presentation. We accepted the report a couple weeks, when was it, yesterday? Last Monday. And you all are here to make the presentation. Start by introducing yourselves and then have at it.
Thank you, Dean. We'll just jump right in. So, to my left is Cynthia Moore. She's a behavior system strategist for our team here at Central Office. Way over to my right is Patrice Hutchin. She's a dean of students at West High. And Sarah Kenevi is a PBS coach at Glendale Elementary. And to my right is Quinn Craw, behavior education coordinator. And I'm Jay Affelt, director of physical, mental, and behavioral health. Thank you for having us back this month, and we're here tonight to present and go through with you our proposed draft of the revised behavior education plan. As we've discussed, we're just wrapping up a thorough 6-month review of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And as we've discussed, our journey has resulted in narratives from across the district from many people about the impact of the behavior education plan on their experiences in MMSD. And we've learned a great deal. We've used what we've learned to put together a completely revised behavior education plan that we believe will provide a roadmap for schools to create healthy and productive school communities, while also providing common language and resources for all stakeholders to better understand how we can work together in support of this work. We're hoping to first provide an overview of the full document and then have a discussion gathering specific feedback on the document itself. And then we'll shift and we'll talk more about the behavior response grid in detail and talk through some proposed changes there as well. Just providing a couple of highlights of some of the changes that you'll see as you page through the revised plan. You'll see more graphics and visuals that we hope will make the content easier to understand. Flow charts are used to help clarify how we think things should work, including references to other parts of the document that provide a more detailed description of certain elements. You'll also see visual progressions that we hope will make the response grid easier to understand, and especially for students, where we know that the current response grid falls short, clarifying how both interventions and response changes as the severity of behavior increases. You will also find more focused connectors to help students, families, community members, and staff understand the additional layers of relevance on many of the pages, including how to specifically access more and additional information. And I'll now transition to Quinn, who will talk through various components in more detail.
What you see on the screen is one of the first statements made in the behavior education plan as we've revised it. The stories we've gathered from students, staff, families, and community members have deepened our understanding of how we all need to work together. These narratives offer a rich and deep dialogue that guides our work, it shapes our beliefs, and it transforms our thinking. We know we need to continue to examine the intersection of culture, race, teaching, and behavior. We all need to reflect on our roles in bringing this work to life. We think that that captures that. Next is goals and metrics. And moving beyond simply just measuring success by number of incidents or level of consequences given, we want to shift to prioritizing a sense of belonging for all involved and working to create a thriving learning community in every school that aligns to our strategic framework. We also know we can improve in how we are developing foundational practices in every school, and we can improve in our use and documentation of interventions and supports listed in Goal 2. We've also been learning more about mindset and our continued struggle with disproportionality. We know that when community doesn't exist and when we don't know each other well or needs aren't being met, we can find ourselves in unhealthy recursive cycles that perpetuate gaps. We can push through this if we continue to focus on mindset and beliefs. Next in the presentation is a graphic you've seen before. And just want to emphasize that we've learned so much from our school teams in this process. And more than anything, we've learned about the critical importance of the 4 foundational practices you see up there: culturally responsive teaching, restorative justice, social emotional learning, and positive behavior interventions and supports. These practices are at the heart of the new behavior education plan and are the focus of what we want to do in supporting schools. This next slide just goes a little bit deeper in kind of the progressive approach to the document itself. We begin with universal systems and foundational practices, as were just mentioned, and then we start to pair into interventions and supports added in as needed. We know that better systems of supports for students in need of mental health supports are needed, as well as intensive supports for students that need those. So you can see this inverted triangle kind of gets at that that idea and that belief that we have with this revision to the behavior education plan. We lastly would say that this is all kind of followed by the response grid, where we've kind of shifted toward some of the narrative that we've heard of people just go to the response grid as the BEP is currently written. Really want to focus on those first parts of what's up there. So implementation will improve with that. With that, I'm going to send it back over to Jay.
The very last page of our proposed draft highlights what we are planning to create as additional guidance documents that will actually live outside of the plan itself. We want these additional documents to be even more focused on guidance for implementation. By creating separate documents, we believe that we can make them even more collaborative working documents involving stakeholders in their development, providing additional guidance, case studies, and examples to bring the work to life in ways that the policies can't. Hoping that we can kind of work beyond what exists currently and what has existed over the last 5 years in terms of guidance and support for schools. Beginning with rights and responsibilities, we want to make sure that these align with our strategic framework, our district vision, and our core values. Regarding support for students with disabilities, we're planning to move beyond just simply technical and more procedural guidance to include best practices and guidance for schools and truly developing systems of support with the help of stakeholders representing students, families, staff, and our community providers. Again, building off of the best practices that we see in our schools and coming out of the work of our committee where much of what we learned was based on what we heard from school teams, we want to be able to highlight and hold up for others to see those best practices playing out in our schools today. Working with school-based staff from across the district, pull together to create a document that will truly support schools in developing these systems in every school, including the way that we engage families as partners in this work as a part of our implementation. And lastly, regarding bullying prevention and response, we're hoping to shift again beyond technical and more procedural guidance to better integrate proactive work around culture and climate and additional and more effective systems of intervention before we get to those technical pieces of our plan. And so with that, I'd like to pause and just generally gather your feedback on the full document itself, and then we'll shift and talk in more detail about the response grid itself.
My first one is actually fairly semantics, but as someone with a vision issue, can we not use that navy blue text sometimes on black documents, right, and how it shows up on the screen sometimes?
Yeah.
I know that sounds weird, but it's actually harder to see. But as I get back to the goals and metrics that we're actually focusing not just on suspension numbers, what I was afraid of this behavior education plan was that it would turn into an increased punishment plan focusing on how many suspensions, how many expulsions, and I'm kind of glad to see that it's not. I still need to go through the grid thoroughly, and we'll have more comments at that time, but I do appreciate that. And I appreciate on the bullying to have very specific things, because a lot of times our students who are being bullied oftentimes get the higher punishment because everyone sees the second person. They don't always see what started the fight. You see the second person, never the first. So I think that's really helpful. I think you've done a very good one.
Thanks, thank you. Thank you.
TJ?
I appreciate the work that's going on this, and I like lots of things. I think that the graphics, and there's a lot of clarity, and I think some of the changes in emphasis are very, very, very positive. I also don't think this is going to be ready to be passed on February 25th, and I want to say that straight out. I think that there's still a fair amount of work to be done on the grid, and you know, based partially on the meeting we had last week, but also some other things that are there, and I think some feedback on that. And beyond that, unlike Nikki, I don't like the goals, and I'll go get to that in a minute. And I also think that I'll just kind of quick off the top, and I'll come back to all three of these. One is that I think I want to talk about the goals. I want to talk about the relative equality of the foundational practices, and as I said at a previous meeting, I think that the interventions that district-wide, these are great foundational practices for everything we do. But this is the behavior education plan, and I think that the behavior-focused interventions piece really needs to have a stronger emphasis than culturally relevant work, and I would even say even than restorative justice. And I'll come back to that again in the third place. And the last kind of speaks to the PBIS piece in here, which is that, as far as I can tell, interventions are defined as PBIS, period. Now, if we're going to use PBIS, I don't know if we're now using it as an umbrella term for everything we do in terms of behavior, response, and intervention, as opposed to a very specific program, which is PBIS. But if we're making that transition in how we're using the language of PBIS, I think we need to be clear about it, because if all we have in place for interventions is traditional PBIS, I think we failed. Well, I think we will continue to fail. Mm-hmm. So let me kind of just, that's the overview, and I'll try and do this quick talk about the goals. I don't think sense of belonging is the right goal. I think that the correct, if I had to go offhand from my memory of what we do in the climate survey, I think that consequences are fair for everyone would be a better goal. I think I feel safe at school would be a better goal. I think that those are the two off the top of my head. I'd have to go back to the whole climate survey. But a sense of belonging, I don't know what that means. So, number two, I think foundational practices are important. I think we need something better than self-assessment, and I don't know what intervention documentation means. And perhaps the intervention documentation would satisfy me, but what I found going through previous self-assessments is that there's a great unevenness between how people see themselves and the reality of schools. And I was even told by the administrator at one point that the self-assessments on the PBIS self-assessments were garbage. Well, I don't want to base this on garbage. That's that one. And three is the disproportionality. I don't want to end up like we did last year where we were praising ourselves for disproportionality when more African American students were suspended, but even more white students were suspended. And so somehow or other we viewed this as success. I don't want to end up there again. And I also think that, as we've talked before, and I think Nikki kind of indicated around suspensions, is that we get obsessed with suspensions, and one of the things is that when we get these measures that things get corrupted and people just kind of stop suspending. Or what we've heard anecdotally multiple times is that kids are sent home with their parents and no suspension is logged. And that's really problematic because they don't want their numbers to look bad. So I don't know what the right number is. I think we need some hard number based on what's being recorded in OASIS. Maybe it's something around, I proposed before that we define success something like students don't progress from level 2 to 3 or don't progress from level 3 to 4 or something. Now that's corruptible too. Yep. Everything is corruptible. But I don't know. I will say that I don't want to see another report where we praise ourselves for increasing total suspensions, but increasing them more for white students than other students. I mean, to me, that's totally off where we should be. Maybe, and I don't have an answer on that one. I just know I'm not comfortable with that. I think I spoke about the foundational practices already. Is that I do think that whether we list these four here, the attention given, especially to the interventions, is where, when you look at the survey of staff, what they said is that we want more and clearer and better consequences. And I've talked about that before. I think I'll just kind of leave that there. I'm happy to see the special education and bullying things will be fleshed out elsewhere. I think it's very important how we do that. And I'm a little concerned that there's so little of it in here. And I think before we had too much, or we tried to do too much, but I think that the balance, that there's 1 or 2 paragraphs on special education. There's, I think, just a definition around bullying, not a whole lot there. And I think that I really look forward to the fleshed out pieces, but I'd like to see a little bit more in here on both of those especially. I got a small thing. Those are kind of the big issues beyond that aren't part of the grid. One question about something on page 14, which is just very kind of technical. Page 14 of the draft high school. It says in bold towards the bottom, further, an intervention must be put in place before progressing to the next response level for a repeat behavior. Does that mean if an intervention is not put in place? I mean, one way you can avoid progressing is to not put an intervention into place. And I know that's not the intent there. But, I think it should be an intervention, that you just don't put an intervention in place and the student never progresses. It stays at level 2 forever and ever because nobody did an intervention, and that's exactly what we don't want to do. I mean, right? I think. The behavior continues, the behavior accelerates, nobody does an intervention, stays at level 2 forever and ever. So I don't know what the proper language is there, but this, to me, this creates this huge loophole for schools. And again, we know that our schools' practices have been corrupted by concern about metrics. And if we don't acknowledge that and we don't try to address it, or if we create new loopholes for corruption, I think we end up not in a good place.
TJ?
So, yeah, I'm done now. That was it.
Well,
That was it.
actually, there was quite a lot. I was going
That was
to
it.
ask if, I saw some of you perk up as some of the things you earlier said, so do you want to, can some of you respond to some of that, and or point by point, and then TJ, kick back in if you need to clarify what you were saying. So,
Dean, can I make a
you wanna go
suggestion?
first, Jen? Yeah.
I mean, I think we would be here all night if we kind of went through every point and debated it, but I think we could certainly do that if that's the desire of the board. The goals, I would love to hear from other board members, if you would be okay with that, just diving into just the goals issue for a minute and hearing from others as opposed to kind of continually popcorning around on other issues. The goal section is very important to us to get right. There's been a lot of discussion about this among our team, and we'd love to get some more perspective on just that issue.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Do you want to speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think I said my piece on the goals.
Yeah, I'm actually wondering
All right.
like
I
other
said my
people.
piece.
Okay, then let's,
I don't know, was Kate here for that?
around this
I heard your
specific
goals
issue.
comment, yeah, and I have comments on the goals as well, so do you
Yeah.
want to, Mary, did you?
Okay, then you'll, okay, Mary, Imad, Kate.
Page 5, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would concur with TJ that with regards to goal number 1, that I don't believe that a sense of belonging for this particular, for the BEP is the goal that I would pick. And so that's, I'm happy to, hear why. I'm sure there's really good reasoning as to why it was picked, but I would, at least in first consideration without hearing that, would be much more, lean much more towards things where students talk about their feeling of safety.
One thought, we certainly could, I'd like to hear the team explain why they picked this particular goal and metric, but we do have other power questions in the strategic framework. The safety question is one of the power questions. This actually is another, if I'm remembering those right. There are several student power questions, but do you guys want to say a little bit about why you picked this particular
I can
goal?
speak to at a school level.
Yeah.
So we've been on our behavior education program path for 5 years now, and I'm at an elementary school, so also remember that we've done a lot of focus groups that build our understanding of what kids think they're answering when they do that climate survey. And at the elementary level, when we ask the safety question, when you probe underneath that, elementary kids report, I get worried when we have code reds. We have fire drills and I'm not exactly sure I know where to go. So at the elementary level, they're not going to emotional safety or even like physical safety in terms of, am I safe be sitting here next to Patrice? They're literally going to a very developmentally early sense of safety. So that question for us wasn't addressing our needs of, do you feel connected to the community? And so we began exploring this belonging question. And what we found, even last year's results at Glendale, 67% of kids report strongly feeling they belong or very strongly feeling they belong across all demographics. When you isolate that out, you find 50% of our Black children and our multiracial children reporting this sense of belonging. So if we're working at disproportionality and community and relationships, and then when we flesh out belonging for them, it's I'm good at what I'm doing academically. It has links back to the classroom. I feel like I can trust an adult. I feel like I have friends here. And so that's a more robust measure for us, given this philosophy of education. So that's where, at a school level, why we land on belonging in term versus isolated safety. And I think that's probably different depending on what age you're asking.
I would just add, in our committee, we sort of based much of our conversation on the fundamental belief that behaviors are just symptoms of kids who aren't engaged and aren't supported. And for me, belonging is then everything. And it gets at, if I feel safe, if I feel that I'm engaged, if I feel that I'm a part of the community, if I feel that I'm connected and supported, and if the way our community runs is fair, then I feel I belong. And so for me, I think we landed on belonging because I think that is the umbrella that the rest of those questions kind of sit underneath.
Want to respond to that?
I'd like to
TJ?
hear, I mean,
Yeah. Well, Imad was next, Mary, then Kate, or,
I'll come in at the end.
yeah, and you can come back. So go ahead, Imad.
Okay. Yeah. First of all, thank you for the work. I really appreciate the increased emphasis on, moving away from the grid and towards the interventions. When we're talking about goal 1, I think I agree with TJ and Mary. It's really tough to define belonging. There's many reasons why a student may feel like they do belong or they don't belong. And we can't really flesh out with that one question whether that's related to the BEP or not. So I think maybe we could, possibly do a deeper dive into, like revising that question maybe to be more specific to the BEP, or at least having a little clarity on what the question is exactly that you want students to answer, and that make it a little more specific to the document. And I'm fine with goal 2. With regards to goal 3, I really like the intent. I think there's more just besides the suspension metrics that we can use to measure reducing disproportionality. I think talking to students of color would be especially useful since they're the ones experiencing that in the school buildings day to day. And as TJ said, schools can sometimes not use best practices when they're trying to match these metrics to get the data that they want.
Kate.
So I'm going to stick on the goals piece for a minute. I'm just curious, what do you guys look at when you're trying to figure out how you're doing in a school, high school or elementary? Because the climate survey comes out not that frequently, so it can't be your regular feedback source. What's the source of data that you guys look at?
I think it's the combination of the 3 things that we've put in this document. So belonging, as Jay named it, isn't just about trying to know.
I appreciate that, but like that's like a point in time survey that you get once a year or twice a year. So if you're just waking up on a Monday morning or what are the pieces of information that you're looking at to see how you're, like, are you happy with how you're progressing? Is there anything you need to do different? It can't be a once a year.
Right.
I know what we look at every week. Again, speaking from one single school, and then maybe you can speak for what you're looking at every week. We are talking about belonging every week. We get a metric once a year. We also built our own in-house to flesh out exactly what you're saying, to flesh out what that means. But in addition, weekly, we're looking at students that have the highest number of referrals. Every Friday, we're looking at that for the week so that we can match up this idea of intervention and support. So there's not a week that doesn't go by where we're not thoroughly thinking about the students that have struggled the past week. And then we, of course, look at it quarterly and semesterly and annually. But it's that week snapshot that allows us to stay on top of this idea of intervention. We're looking at disproportionality incredibly regularly, at monthly minimum, to see how our numbers are swinging, and we're also paying attention to numbers. So it's not just that we suspended more students of another. We're looking at our problem-solving requests, so how many problem-solving requests come in from teachers? What's the demographic of that? What's the grade level of that? So that's when teachers need additional support above and beyond what they feel like they can handle in the instructional team. We're looking at that weekly so that we're keeping a pulse on who needs what. I'd say, though, in terms of behavior, though, that's what we look at weekly.
Okay.
I think just in addition, when we're thinking about high school, like really focusing on maybe like suspensions for that week, like weekly meetings and talking about what happened, you know, like what interventions are going to be put into place, how are we supporting students. And I think also a big one that we're often looking at is where are our numbers in terms of students in the hallways, and what that looks like and who they are and how are we supporting them and how are we helping them to get into the class. So that can be through interventions, that can be through groups, that can be through maybe SSIT referrals, different supports that way. So I think those are two of the really big things that we're often looking at weekly.
I would also add, schools use PBIS teams to create student surveys. There are very few schools that are just waiting for the climate survey in April to drive this information. They have checkpoints along the way, whether it's just asking explicitly throughout the year, do you feel you belong? Are you feeling safe, etc. Schools have their own devised metrics to kind of come up with that. There are PBIS metrics. There's the benchmark of quality and the self-assessment survey. That's a fall and spring metric. There are surveys that we use through culture and climate visits at the district level to support the school level and thinking about all the foundational practices as well as data practices and kind of opening all this up. So again, I guess I would just come back to these three metrics and goals kind of are paint the picture of what schools do on a day-to-day basis and what they look at.
I guess I'm just wondering if there's something around the intervention piece that is trackable. I mean, I think your goal number 2 has 2 pieces in it. One is really the systems piece, and 2 is the intervention piece. And maybe those are actually good enough for goal 1 and 2. They're different. And goal 3, I mean, certainly has its flaws, but probably needs to be there. So I don't know, like goal 2 to me feels like actually the main point of what we're trying to do, which is set up successful school-wide systems that are integrated into academics and to teaching and to learn. Like there's a system thing, and then there's also are we delivering interventions in between discipline that support the medium-term changes we want in behavior. And so, I don't know, for me, I might try to split those 2 things up. The intervention should be straightforward to measure, even if it's maybe a little bit onerous. The systems piece could be measured by, are you doing your every Friday look back at the week with the right people in the room? Like, I don't know what the simplest way to do that is, but it certainly is a measurable thing if you pick an arbitrary measure for it that seems to reflect the fact that there's a successful system working, you know.
I just want to comment on, I think that makes sense. I think there are 2 that teasing out systems and interventions makes sense to me. The BEP stays incredibly narrow if we don't figure out this idea of belonging, because it's directly linked to the education and learning piece of it. 2 years of focus groups with kids, given it's just in one school, when they feel like they're good at a learning content or a subject area, they report a high sense of belonging. And so it speaks directly to the classroom. If I'm good in math, if I see myself as a mathematician, I then feel like I belong at my school, and that shapes my identity. So if we leave belonging out, we need to think about how this becomes a global vision for social emotional success. And I'm happy, I think we could mess with the metrics or what it is or flesh it out more so that everybody understands what we're asking, but it's the most global, robust vision that sets us apart from other work in other districts.
So I'm going to say one more thing and then I'll pass it back. I actually don't have an issue with belonging being in here. I think it's all about our starting point.
Right.
And you are starting from a starting point that is more mature than some of the schools that
Sure.
we need to support. So like I'm thinking about the schools that I literally just want to make sure they're doing all of the things that both of you just rattled off the top of your head that's second nature.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that's happening?
Yeah, that makes
At
sense.
some point, that will yield a difference in belonging,
Exactly.
but it's probably not the first year or maybe even the second year.
Yeah.
It might be year 5 that you start to be able to be mature enough to think about and or see. I don't know. So maybe it's two numbers for the same goal, but belonging, should be a result of a strong system in a school supporting kids.
Right.
Dean, can I chime in on
Yeah.
this for a
Thank you.
second?
is it around this issue?
Yeah.
Yeah, I finished this, so Nikki can be next.
I want to encourage the board not to give up on this metric around belonging. And I, based on my experience with this team over the years, I think that you could have a decent system of intervention and support, and that in and of itself will not produce a stronger sense of belonging in school. And that what the team is trying to get after is a metric that will hold us more accountable for the proactive work that we need to do to build community in classrooms. And the theory, I think, behind these metrics is if we build more community in classrooms and schools, there'll be fewer behaviors to respond to and less need for intervention. So that it's not one or the other, and it's both. And I get what you're saying, Kate.
I think that's all the more reason, though,
Yeah.
to tie it to systems here, and it makes it a little bit more specific about, as a result of how we choose to think about climate and behavior in our district.
Yeah.
That we're looking for systems that are proactive, that aren't just about discipline. It's not, we're not talking about a system where you know who has the walkie-talkie at any given moment, right? So, I think it's all the more reason to tie it very explicitly, that this isn't the strategic framework version of belonging is kind of very global, and I think something that's a little more actionable here, just make the link a little stronger for us. That would be my take on it, and
Okay.
you guys may have a different.
Okay, Nikki, go ahead.
We want to build community.
Goal 1, I have to agree with Kate. I think we should, belonging is the result. I think belonging is a definite measure we need to have, but I think we need to start with this more of a result and work into the system. My main one is that goal number 2, I think, should be split into 1 and 2. And my big one is goal number 3. I think at least with special ed, students with disabilities, instead of just looking at suspension data, could we look at if IEPs are being followed? They think that's a major issue. I think then we're showing disproportionality if they're being met or if they're not being met. Additionally, if we're just doing suspensions, then we're still on the punishment track as much as how many interventions have been done before the suspension. Can we do something like that? How many? And I'm not saying for weapons at school. I'm not saying for the most severe. I am saying for the ones that may take a little time, that we have some direct interventions in the middle, that we can see it. Those are my points on that. Additionally, my other one quibble, and it isn't a goal, so I'm just putting in very, very quickly, is the fact that to be truly PBIS, you really can't do seclusion and restraint, but maybe that's just me and a hang-up on some actions. Thank you.
Okay, I want to say, and you can go. In goal number 1, it seems like it's a little confusing to me because of because we have it in the strategic framework, and it gets mixed up. In my head, I mix them up, and this is a very specific part of our school process. This is the BEP. It's not the framework. So sense of belonging is in the framework. So it seems to me that when you discussed what belonging was, you put like 4 things underneath it. So it seems like there's a belonging or somehow find a different word that combines the things that you want to see in sense of belonging with those other things in it, and that's what it is. And I don't have that word yet, or add to it sense of belonging and safety and a couple others, and then I think it's more clear. That's my only take on it. So TJ, then James.
I appreciate the information around how particularly elementary students
that helps.
Interpret these things, and I think that's a problem with a lot of our climate survey things, that we don't have the intimate knowledge you have, and next time we discuss the climate survey, I'd love to.
I'm happy to pull a group together for you.
I would love to, because it really does make it hard for us to understand these things, and I also appreciate the thinking behind belonging, and I can see why it should be there, but I think there needs to be something else there too. And what I think is what belonging misses is how students who already belong feel belonging, experience school. What are the disruptions? What are the irritants? What are the frustrations that they're experiencing in relation to behavior? And I think that's missing from belonging. That, you know, a kid who is happy in his class feels like he belongs in the school, but that loud junk in the hallway is driving him crazy, doesn't get captured by thing, and we failed when that has happened. And so I'm looking at the climate survey. I'll start with the consequences are fair to everyone. I think that says a whole hell of a lot about our implementation. I'd say second is students in this school care about one another's feelings, which gets at social emotional learning and success of that. And that isn't just that I feel belonging, but this is the climate of the school. And the related question, students in this school resolve conflicts in productive ways. And our metrics on those ones are universally very low among our students. And I guess and I don't know how students interpret those, so maybe if they don't, but to me I think that elementary students probably have a pretty good, that language isn't beyond them, and that it wouldn't take them wouldn't take them someplace where we don't intend it to go. So, keep belonging, but I want something else too. I think that there seems to be a consensus here about splitting up the systems piece and the interventions piece, and I'll add to that consensus that I'd like to, before we finalize this, I'd like to have a better sense of what we will be seeing in terms of the intervention piece. And I just want to add something I forgot the first time, and we can come back to it, is that I think we need some statement of student rights in here, which was, I don't think
in
it's
the goals.
in here, is it?
There's a page on rights, due process,
Is
and
there?
jurisdiction.
Okay, maybe I missed it.
Jurisdiction,
But yeah,
it's in there.
It may be a little less.
my
student-
mistake.
It may just be a little less student directed than you intend, but there is a page on that.
Is there a way to move it up so that
What page is it?
James.
Thanks, Dean. And as I've said before, I really appreciate the work. I really appreciate the team. Over the years when we talk about goals, at least as my memory serves me, and it may not serve me correctly all the time, we are always in pursuit of the perfect goals. The perfect goals. I don't know that we've ever sat around this table as a board and really agreed on the goals. And I don't think we're going to agree on them here. I think sense of belonging belongs there, no doubt about it. I think it is what is at the core of what a lot of the issues we see with behaviors are in our schools. I think it definitely belongs there. I don't know if people around this table and in this room have walked through this world and had to experience not belonging. Some people experience not belonging from cradle to grave. That's part of what our society is. It's about, do you belong or not? And so I've talked to kids over the years, and what has come out is how they feel about being in school. Talk to my own kids about it. I think sense of belonging, it belongs there, and no question about it. But more than that, I want to talk about the process of getting here and determining what these goals should be. I mean, we assembled what I think was one of the best groups of staff that we've assembled in a long time to work on the BEP here, and so I think it came out in the discussion about the climate surveys. I mean, so much we don't know around this table that our staff simply knows more than we do, and they simply have access to more information than we have. And so when you go through the process, I mean, we did case studies. We brought a lot of people in, school staff. So these weren't derived by some, flip of the hat or what have you. We had a lot of input before arriving at this, and arriving at these goals, arriving at all the information that's contained in the documents. And so, you know, I'm gonna stick with the process. I'm gonna stick with the people we had working with the process. I think we've come to a very good product here. I do think there may be some minor adjustments that need to be made. I can see in Goal 2 that you could tease out that. I think disproportionality definitely has to be there, whether you just use suspension data versus some other data. I think that's something that could be talked about. But to talk about redoing goals totally, I'm just not in support of that. I think we're in the right place here. And so I think the process has been good. I think the process historically has been good with the BEP. And that's why we're here, because we have revised it over the years. And that's why we're here. And so, no, I think there's some minor tweaks that needs to be made, but I think we're always in search of the perfect goals. And we will continue to search for the perfect goals, and we'll never get there. So I'm going to stick with these, but I'm definitely in support of minor tweaks. I think teasing out number 2, as you stated, is a good idea, and maybe looking at, you know, how we want to measure disproportionality. But I think we're in the right place here, and I'm going to stay with the process.
Okay, Kate, one more time.
I was going to move off goals. Can we move off goals?
No, it's not goals, you're right. Go ahead.
What did you say?
I was going to move away from goals. Are we done with goals?
I think we're done.
One thing before.
Please.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Just kind of thinking about this sense of belonging, and I think the thing that we have to remember, and why I feel strongly that it's in the right place, is that when we're thinking about belonging, we're bringing the students who have the troubling behaviors or who are struggling in, and we're making them a part of our school community. We're finding ways to make them feel accepted, to have them feel heard, to have them feel like they are a part of their school. And I think when we focus on safety, or we focus on, you know, kind of the other ones that were mentioned, it makes the students that have the troubling behaviors the other. And it looks at ways that we can get them out. And I think that is what we're trying to get away from with the BEP, right? Like, if we want to focus on inclusion and we want to focus on getting away from restrictive and all, you know, and exclusionary practices, if we focus on those other things, it's like, well, how are we getting those kids that don't know how to do this out, rather than how are we looking to pull them in? So I think that is just another way to think about it, is that we really want to focus on how are they a larger part of this community, even if they are struggling a little bit, rather than like, how do we not have them here? So,
I'm sorry, but I don't think asking students to resolve conflicts in productive ways is othering anyone or pushing anyone out. And I really don't like it being characterized as such.
Yeah, no, I was gonna
move away from the goals.
I was gonna move away from the goals. So, I mean, first of all, I know that this was a tremendous amount of work to do this level of a rewrite and simplification and clarification with all of the graphics. So, thank you. I think it's a much clearer document, and I think will be used very differently simply because of the ease of interacting with it. So I think that piece is incredibly well done. My 2 kind of questions are probably the same ones that I've said previously. The first is around systems and really articulation of what does a best-in-class system look like, really bringing in that academic piece. And I know there's planned to be another guiding document, and I missed your intro today, and I had a really hard time hearing, actually, last Monday. So I don't know, what's the timeline for that guidance document? How does that live with relation to this?
Yeah. So the guidance document is going to be created through a cross-functional team where we're going to pull central office and school-based people together to really discuss what our best practices. What are we hearing from schools that's needed? It is taking the toolkit as it was designed 5 years ago and trying to learn from what was a strength of that and what challenges were, and make it into something that is more clear with added visuals, with added graphics, with added ease, so that schools can take alternative to suspension, look at the template and say, okay, I need to insert information here, here, and here. But what we want is for the flexibility for school teams to be able to kind of see what they need to do. So that work needs to continue. I would also emphasize that it's going to be difficult to pick that work up right away if the policy is still in limbo. So if the board is still considering like what the policy in its final form will be into March and April, that delays that work too.
So what's your goal, assuming this does move forward at this point, what's your goal in terms of a timeline for the guidance document?
The goal in terms of the guidance document will be finalizing in the spring to roll out to schools toward the very end of the school year. Get the right people at the table from school-based teams to both start wrapping their head around and then forming plans over the summer. We pulled culture and climate funds last year. I think we intend to pull them this year to make sure staff are being paid for their time and doing the work that we need them to do.
Okay.
And no more snow days. Okay.
I agree with that. So, the reason I ask is really the universal systems page and just wanting to feel like it's a mirror of something else that we have clarity on. And I can imagine us wanting to come back to that page in 2 months' time and change it. And if we do, maybe that's what we do. But I would hope that page would kind of be the synthesis of what this guidance doc ends up saying in terms of
about page 7.
11.
Page 11. It's the first kind of frame of PBIS.
I mean, it's potentially not the reflection of everything you want in that guidance document, but some of it feels, and maybe TJ, to your point, like the PBIS is one component of what we're talking about when we talk about systems. And I don't know. So it feels a little off to me. I don't think it's worth slowing the process down, but ultimately I would want that page to be.
And I think a lot of it too is the way that we look at PBIS and the way we define it is really that framework by which we make decisions. So how are we using data to look at our multi-tier system of support rather than the doing and the intervention? I mean, there is a piece of PBIS that talks about intervention, but PBIS in and of itself is not an intervention. It is our framework that guides our thinking. And so that's why it seems a little bit more kind of nebulous or not kind of as clearly defined, because it's our framework and that's how we look at it, at least within our district.
Yeah, and I just want to add to what Cynthia shared. I think some of it is definitional issue, that it's not PBIS as a system from like 5 years ago. It's the comprehensive framework that the rest of it lives in. And I think to TJ's point about the critical nature of this component of foundational practices, that there is actually 3 pages of this that build out the universal things you do, the tier 2 things you do, and the tier 3 things you do, that are all in that foundational practice in the overall picture.
Yeah, I mean, I think the piece that's missing is the piece that I think is coming, which is who are the people? When do they interact behind the scenes? Like, what is the system, right? Not PBS. What's the system of staff that's interacting with families? And literally, like, when does that happen? Who does it? Who calls? When? Like, and I think that's coming. I kind of wanted to see like a teeny weeny tip of the iceberg here. So,
well, and we have the ad hoc committee to continue to focus on that too, Kate. Like, to flesh out more of that.
And so the second is really a continuation of that feedback, which is in the in your examples from page 20, 21, etc. You know, we talked about kind of adding in the intervention piece in between, and I appreciate that we've got this kind of bar on the left, but I just, if we can make this even more explicit, so after support, redirection, and warning, what happens? Because the interventions in different phases are different, and I think adding clarity there would again make this feel less like a discipline document and more like a what do I do as a staff person to be proactive versus how do I use a policy to figure out what level of discipline to give a kid.
Yeah, so I wanted to tell just a little bit of the story, and I think following these versions, for a while it was just consequences, and then it was a full row of interventions and a full row of consequences. Then we got some feedback that that made the intervention seem a little too formulaic, and
Yeah.
it's more of every individual student needs something different in terms of intervention in a different sequence, kind of given the circumstances. And we got feedback primarily from school staff that's like, it doesn't work like that. It's not like you get to level 3 and now you have access to this menu. It's which is what led us back to this continuum, meaning you're constantly reviewing the menu as you progress up in terms of what are the interventions that are going to work in this particular case. And so, but to your point, and I don't want to put too much on like the forthcoming implementation guidance, but I think that's where we sort of build out what does best practices look like when a team of adults in a building come together to review what's been happening with the systems in place that you can then use to support individual students.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think there may be more good than harm from being a little more black and white than it really looks. I mean, frankly, that's the way the consequences look too, right? Like, it's not actually as black and white as this. I just, the optics, this pulls us back towards, well, here's what I go do, and less thinking on, at a bare minimum, once you've had an in-school suspension, here's how we should be engaging with this child in our school. Like, at a bare minimum, we're talking about that kid on a X basis. Like, I don't know what those things are. You guys know, what would your expectations of good look like? And there may be some at a bare minimums with other tools that would look very different in different schools, different grades, et cetera. But if there are pieces that you would feel comfortable in, 8 out of 10 cases, this should be happening to support this child coming back from an out-of-school suspension, coming back into a classroom, I think the optics help in giving equal voice to the proactive versus the reactive. So
And I
I
think
don't
there's
know.
that
You
piece-
guys let that live however it works, but
Well, I think there's that piece too before you get to the intervention is actually that discussion about why are you doing the intervention you're doing in the first place. So really engaging those school-based teams, and if you're thinking about this intervention, what is that process and that discussion you're having around a
Totally.
functional behavior assessment or some of the root cause analysis and that team discussion before you choose an intervention? Because sometimes I think if you go to intervention without having that discussion about
Totally.
the why
It's
behind that intervention,
totally.
then we're right. So I think it's also that guidance around how your team is having those discussions.
it's,
around
I mean, the guidance could be, here's the people in the school that need to have been engaged by now. By now, you need to have called home, right? Like, and those level of specifics, I don't think they hurt. I appreciate that they're not perfect all the time or in the right exact spot, but they might do more good than harm for parents to see that they should have gotten a call home by now, right? Like,
Yep.
Okay, Nikki, Mary, and TJ.
I agree with Kate. We're asking for, or at least I'm asking for, some bare minimum specifics. I'm not saying to do this to every child, but at least at this point, these things should have been done, a call home, possibly speaking to a parent, speaking to the student. Just our staff is asking for direction a lot of the time. I hear from people saying, I don't know what I'm allowed to do under the behavior intervention plan. And that's what I keep hearing. And I think that would flesh it out quite a bit, is to know, here are the basics. We're not saying that you should only do that. We're not saying that to go above and beyond. We're setting a floor, not a ceiling. In Lisa law, we have what's called a floor and a ceiling. You can't go below the floor, which is the state law. You can't go above the ceiling, which is the Supreme Court. And very simply, it's an easier way of thinking about it, because we're just saying these are the minimum standards. We're not saying you can't go above the minimum standards, but we're just explaining it in a way that here are what the basics are, so teachers can't say, oh, I didn't know what I was allowed to do. And that's what I hear the most of the complaints from the behavior intervention plan. That's what I hear the most.
Mary.
Yeah, and I think I'm going back to what Kate was saying, I think. And I think this is a really good plan. I think there's a lot of really good work in it. What I'm not sure I see is I'm not sure I see that this really has the ways of addressing the handful of students that we have in most of our schools who are just, it's over and over again, and it's being really disruptive. They're not learning. Others around them aren't learning. It's making it really difficult for the teacher. I personally think that when students aren't learning, and we have tried over and over again to address the issues in school, and I'm not a big fan of either of out-of-school suspensions at all, but I believe also the students should be removed. I think they should be in an environment in which they're going to be supported above the levels at which they can be supported within the setting, and that it includes their family, it includes specialists. It is not a long-term solution, but it's something that might help them recalibrate, pull them away maybe from some negative influences. And so I may be wrong. You guys are experts at this. I'm not. But what I don't see in here, and what I do want to hear about, is with those students, and we have them, that are causing a vast majority of the incidences. I'm not sure I see how that is actually going to change. And when I said I think it might build or coordinate with some of what Kate was saying, is what is going to happen? What are those tools? Do we have those resources? Because that's, I really think we have to, I thought that frankly was a lot of the core of why we undertook this work, is because whether our staff wasn't receiving clear direction, whether we didn't have the amount of supports, whether the plan itself didn't show it clearly, I don't think that we've been really successful. So I'd be interested in, with that lens, very, very focused on these behaviors, what exactly, how do we handle those, and do we need other options that put some students in a setting where they are going to succeed at a higher rate? Because I don't see it right now, and maybe it's happening, but I don't think it's because our staff is just not trained enough, or they don't know the plan, or even like what the steps are. I think we're just dealing with some fairly, with students with some fairly high needs.
I mean, your flow chart
Wait a
does.
minute, let Chad.
Yeah,
Go ahead, then you can chip in.
Yeah, so I think I would agree with you, and our committee had a lot of conversation about students with intensive needs, and we also know that that's intensive needs and mental health supports are kind of first and foremost on in terms of what we heard from staff. Generally speaking, that's less than 1% of our entire student population. And we're talking here about a plan that's supposed to sort of represent like what every single school is doing to support every single student. I do think the way that that the plan is laid out, it starts with like, what are you doing for every student? And then what do you do if you find out that they need something more? And then it gets into the programs and options for a few and intensive supports and alternatives that talks about the decision-making process that kind of gets you from tier 1 to tier 2 and into tier 3, provides guidance for students, families, and for staff on like, what do you do when you have a student that needs something more? And then this is where I think we actually reached not necessarily the limit, meaning it's not just sort of the end and we're done, but it crosses over into our recommendations, which we're also very comprehensive in terms of an array of things that we feel we need to do. From a resources perspective, this is very much about the implementation, like what do we think schools can do to set that up? But beyond that, it has to do more with sort of resources and other systems of support within our district. But we think that if we implement this in every school the way that we've laid it out, we do even more to support students that need something that they're not getting now.
So the 1% of students, do we feel that we have the resources in place that will address the behavioral and get them the support they need?
From a school perspective, we may have resources. It might be re-looking at the resources, being transparent about the resources, fleshing out what the resources are. That's confusing for us at schools. I want to, from my own perspective, I think it is both. I think we have work to do to improve our systems and our teaching and our support of students and the reciprocity with parents. We have work there, and that's what this is, this focus on education. And I think, and I don't know what the board does with this or who does this work, because it is a cross-department, cross-program conversation of what is it we do in MMSD for our students with the most intense need. How do we as staff navigate that system? How does a parent navigate the system? What is the system? And so I think this is a heart of a conversation that needs to happen somewhere. And we didn't, I think Jay said it best, we feel like we got to the limits of what the policy around behavior. Behavior is like the entryway into this conversation.
Yeah,
it's the data
so,
set.
I mean, Sarah, and thank you for the explanation, and that does help me. But I do not believe we can, without that piece that happens. I mean, at West, you're talking about 25 students. I want to know, for those 25 students, what is it? And like you say, if families don't, staff don't know how to, I mean, I think we have to come out of this, not this being the BEP, this being this effort around the ad hoc, the increased focus for the board this year, the will and the commitment to put resources behind this is, like, to me, this work is, it's the, as you said, the entry point.
It is.
But we're not doing our jobs if we don't address that other thing, because it's,
I think we have to hold them both together.
But that's what I want to see.
Yeah.
As part of this, I want to see it in our budget requests. I want to know that the 1% of the students are, and their families, and our staff who are supporting and working with them, know how that is handled, and they have the resources to effectively support these students.
Yes.
TJ was next.
I want to thank Kate and Mary for raising this, and agree with most of what they both said, and I think it is important. And I also have kind of a slightly different focus, which is not the 1% or the ones where we're probably talking long-term alternative ones, alternative placements, and often interacting with special education needs as well as mental health needs and other things. But I'm more concerned, or my concern also includes the, I don't know the percentage, we'll call it the 20% or the whatever, that where we're talking, short-term removals, what are hopefully short-term removals in the process of the education that occurs there, be it in peace rooms or planning rooms. What are we doing with alternatives to suspension? What does restorative justice look like? What kind of things are youth court having students do? Because, you go through what the youth court orders are, and they're kind of all over the place. What kind of plans are there for transitioning back to reintegrate into the classroom? And those kind of, and, what does in-school, I think I say already, what does in-school suspension, but what is alternatives to suspensions? I really think that, we have, on the day-to-day stuff, clearly there's a need for more alternative settings and things like that for the so-called high flyers or whatever, but I think that this other group of students are really key to the success and the climates of our schools. The ones who Neon is not the right place for them. LEAP is not the right place. And either short or long term. And so I guess that I'd like to add that focus as well. And then one other thing is just on these charts. Inevitably, when you look at this, your eye goes to expulsion, because that's at the top. And so can we go from
Sideways.
support, redirection, and warning, can we flip it to expulsion so that the first thing people see is support instead of expulsion? And I mean, that's just a trick of the eye.
Maybe sideways.
Or, well, I don't know if I don't know if we can fit all this
I don't
sideways.
know. It's something.
But you get what I'm saying, where it's, you just, I look at this, go, oh, expulsion, and it's like, and I don't want people open up the behavior education plan and flipping page to page, and the first thing they see is expulsion.
Yeah.
Because we haven't had an expulsion this year.
Right.
Okay,
We
that
haven't had one
was,
this year.
Kate, you wanted in, you
Yeah.
still want in, and Imad?
Yeah. Just briefly on the support piece, I mean, maybe to get a little bit tactical, I mean, page 13 and page 15. Page 15, there is no flow path to an alternative. And page 13 essentially says, connect with your school for what the options are. I mean, we don't have all the answers, but if we could push ourselves to put at least what some of them are in black and white, I think that helps get us farther towards.
I think so, if you put in there, like, these specific alternatives, like, that makes it seem like, I mean, just think about through high school, that is an option at that time. I mean, we have, like, I'm gonna be real with you, like, all the kids we had that applied for an alternative at West, like Capital, we had 3 kids get in. But, so I just don't want there to be this misconception that somewhere on the flow chart, that this is an obvious, easy way to get in through this flow chart or at this time, because, like, that really isn't the reality.
But that's a problem that we have to solve, and I frankly think hiding the fact that we have the option isn't. It's actually better to create demand because that forces us to solve the problem. I mean, the same thing for Catholic Charities. Like, I would put in, we have Catholic Charities support in X, Y, and Z school, and it's not going to be in every school. But the fact that people know that we do that is a good thing because it forces us to continue to solve the problem. Like, I think I appreciate it will cause more discussions, but I think the discussions are actually the right
the discussions are happening.
So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what your take would be, but, like, I don't think hiding the options under the rug, even though we might not have seats for everyone, is.
Yeah, there's so many things layered underneath this. I'm going to tease out a couple of them. One is that the path, what our alternatives are, is unclear, and it's uncertain to navigate as a employee or as a student. And that's this, like, intensive piece that Mary's talking about. What do we offer? What is it? And you can only know what happens here if you're clear that you have a just and fair system of education here, which is this universal practice and all the foundational components that go into it. And it's like holding both of these at the same time, or otherwise we're going to build something that we will just create a huge layer of unjust disproportionality in terms of who is attending those schools. And so it's like holding all of this at the very same time when we don't even know what this is.
Yeah, but I just think it's our job to create clarity.
We would love clarity. We need clarity.
So
Totally
when
agree.
we write page 13, can we write it in a more clear way? And Patrice, like, I mean, it is our job to solve the exact concern you just raised. Like, that's, like, I really appreciate you saying it because it's not something
Which
to
is
not
why
talk
it's
about.
in the recommendation doc that you just
I understand,
accepted
but like,
last
page 13 is
Monday.
supposed to
No, I get
make
that.
it clear for our staff and our families. The thing we just said wasn't clear. It
Yeah,
is.
I want to make sure we stay focused on the policy document. I'm hearing more specificity is needed, and there's a budget and resource discussion that we're having. There are 2 other sections of that recommendations document. We're just probing into the one policy section tonight.
But if
I just
we're
want to
voting
try
on
to keep us focused, but you're not voting on the resource.
I'm not talking about resources. I'm talking about
decisions.
the page.
I know, but there are other people talking about resource investments tonight.
I think we can get a little closer, and it will help.
Okay, Imad was next.
I'm just shifting to a more general question, and it might have a simple answer that I'm just not aware of. When we're talking about intervention and support, at what point do we step back and say, okay, we've tried the intervention and the behavior is repeated, let's move up to the next level? And then when do we say, we look back and say, hey, maybe this intervention isn't working well for the student and we need to change that instead before moving on? And I know that students have due process with regards to talking about, whether they actually committed the behavior and the situation, but do they also have that with when we're talking about how successful the intervention was for them and how they felt it affected them?
That's
Do you want to take it?
Well, there's also too, when we talk about doing interventions, there's this piece of progress monitoring. So when we look at kind of what best practices around implementing interventions, there's usually this period of 4 to 6 weeks of progress monitoring, which by, midway through you are doing a progress check to say, is this child responding to intervention? If not, what do we need to change or tweak and rework, and then continue with the intervention or decide that you're going to take a different route with the intervention. So there's usually that period of time which you are looking at that intervention and seeing if it's having the effect that you intend it to have. Is that answering kind of what you're getting at in terms of length of time?
Yeah, I was just wondering if, we tried the intervention and then the student commits the same behavior next week, how do we go about treating that?
Right. So then it's also looking at, too, that was it the right intervention for the behavior? Because sometimes, too, you have that piece of you may choose an intervention and you think you're getting at one behavior. As you're going through it, you're finding, well, this may not be the right intervention. So then you're looking at, do we try another intervention or do we look at maybe where this intervention may be deviated? So.
And how do we involve students in their own plan? So checking in with students about what would be helpful for them as we continue to monitor.
Okay. Nikki, you had something else?
Just one, I would reiterate on page 13, I think we have also a responsibility to list all options. That we do it in a lot of things. These are the options. It doesn't mean that every option is accessible at every time. It means it lists that they exist and we have the right to explore them. I think that it's really important if we're going to be truly transparent that these exist. Other thing is, not to sound like a broken record on the disability thing, but I'm going to do it anyway. Forgive me in advance. I know we discussed disability at the end, but there is a handful of students who, based on their IEP team, are not, the BEP just does not work for them. I think we need to find a way to reach those parents to tell them, since their behavior is so much a manifestation of the disability, that how to opt out, because oftentimes they don't know how. And I think that's important because there's a very small number. I am not talking, this is I don't believe in it, so I should opt out. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying those with the most severe physical, emotional, mental health disorders who have an IEP, whose team is saying they aren't going to school because they are that suicidal to the point that they cannot be by themselves. I don't want that to count against them as chronic tardy, frequent absence when they are not emotionally capable of attending. And I think something needs to be done in a way to stress that in those very narrow, and I mean very narrow circumstances, that those individuals can't. It's not they don't want to. In that case, I don't see it as much as behavior as condition. That I see it as a medical condition that they just can't.
Nikki, we'll make sure that the special education guidance is really clear on what families can do and what their rights are, and reconvening the IEP to make those changes.
I really appreciate that, because I just, as I said, it's not for everyone, but in that narrow sense, I want to take it care of.
Okay. I think one of the things underlying this is you're hearing that we would like some editing and some other clarifications, but also I think the intensity of the implementation of this program and implementation of this priority needs to increase a little bit. And I think there is another part of the discussion here where we will have in front of us about creating more slots in our opportunity youth programming which I think needs almost a double in order for us to accommodate and fully offer the right type of option to one of our children, a child that's just not making it, no matter what intervention we do in this with this program. And so instead of moving them to up the chart to expulsion, we could move them to something that works. And I don't think I don't think you intended this, but I wanted to be clear that I don't think any of us think that a referral to a different opportunity program is a disproportionate response. I'm not sure that, I don't think any of us believe that, that if what mainstream isn't working and that the Neon or the others aren't working either, there should be something else available that we can do, and it's our responsibility to do that. So I think how that gets linked up with the BEP is one area that needs to be clarified a little bit. It says if none of this is working, and the high flyers that we call them just continue to get circled through this thing, let's just stop that world right now and get them into a different world, a different opportunity that will make it so as we don't have to do extraordinary things like creating this program that we did for a handful of students at La Follette last year. We should be more in front of that instead of reacting to it, and I think we know enough to be able to do that. One other thing that I have is page 4. I know that, Jen, you're going to write your thing, but there's a message from the board there, and I don't think the ad hoc committee worked on that. I would ask us to, we're supposed to write something there, so who's going to take the lead on that? And I'm sure we'd all like to see it so we could offer our edits. So I think we have to set I'm open as to how we should do that, establishing a couple volunteers to write that, or we all want to have a whack at it, but we should have
Dean, I would say as board president, I will take responsibility for that and make sure that we distribute it and get everyone's input.
You think you could do that by the end of the month? Or to give me, what do you think, when you think you can do it? Because we're going to vote on this at some point, and we'd all like to see it so we could have our wax.
Let's just say it will be in plenty of time before the plan comes to the board.
Okay.
So it'll be part of the overall improvement. So since we're looking at that for February, it would certainly be well in advance of the board meeting so that we can have all board input and on that.
Yeah, and I think that's something we'll probably have to all vote on. I think that's something we want to vote on, so we'll do that. Nikki?
Is there a way, I believe this is some of the most important work that the board is doing. I think this is needed. We hear it from our teachers, we hear it from our students, we hear it from all our staff. And I am not trying to delay it, but I want to make sure it's right. I don't want to rush it and then end up saying, oops, we forgot this. Oops, we forgot that. And I understand that. Is there a way to push it back 1 month to March to make sure that we get the last things in? Because I don't want to confuse our staff. We have a document and then, oh, we're changing this. We're changing this, we're changing this, because I'm afraid that will cause confusion.
Nikki, I would suggest that the ad hoc committee talks about timeline on Monday when they meet. This will be their opportunity to absorb the feedback that was heard tonight. In the meantime, Jay, you may want to respond to what pushing back a month would do for your timeline.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that we're sort of out of time here, but I wanted to just raise at least a couple things about the grid and share some of the conversation we've had. But, I also don't want to rush it. We don't want to be in a position where as soon as it's approved, we have to come back and make changes to it. But I also want to hold on the other side of that. our ability to kind of move forward with building out the implementation guidance, our ability to roll this out to schools before we hit summer, our whole rationale for shifting this time frame up was so that we can leverage this spring to do the pre-work, so that we're not asking schools to sort of scramble to figure all this out when we come back from summer break. So I think next Monday night we'll sort of talk through where we think we are. I mean, I feel like we've landed on some fairly clear kind of consensus changes, and we'll build those in, even before our committee meets on Monday.
Yep.
And then we can sort of discuss some of these other issues to see where do we land in terms of what's in the plan and what lies outside somewhere else.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
Great, did you want one more?
yeah, just maybe to, I think we can do that Monday. I think a fair amount of the feedback, or what we're all eager to see, also lives outside of the policy, which is good in the sense that we could move forward with the policy. And I guess my biggest question, maybe Patrice, keying a little bit off your comments, I mean, this is a really strong group of people that we've got. You're dedicating your time to help drive this forward. Is there a way that we can continue to push outside of the policy realm with this group of people? Some of this is cross-functional. Some of it does cut across departments. I mean, I think you're hearing impatience and eagerness from us to continue to push to do the right things for our kids, even though some of those things are not straightforward. Is there a way to, and maybe this is for you and Mary to talk about, but how could we use you, maybe if you're willing, to keep pushing to answer some of those questions? We've got a really good thing, and we all want to be doing, we're all frustrated because we want to be doing more than what's been asked of this exact group. So is there a way to do more? It's a question for you guys to maybe come back with some thoughts on.
Last call.
Yeah, so I'll try to move quickly here, but
That's okay, no, take your time.
last week we had an opportunity to meet with the policy committee, and we talked through the grid in detail. And so our ad hoc committee has been discussing the grid and those proposed changes. They were in sort of subjective form in our recommendations that we've gotten quite a bit of feedback on and now finalized. And the grid has also been out there in terms of the actual objective language around some of those changes. And there's a couple things that are changes that we sort of agreed upon with the policy committee that that aren't reflected in the version that you're looking at tonight. Starting on page 23, dealing with marijuana, I think it's widely known that we've decided to separate marijuana from other drugs, in particular because of the 1 gram threshold. But we also want to separate more than 1 gram of marijuana from other drugs, so that that does not rise to an expellable offense. So beyond what you're looking at here, pulling more than 1 gram of marijuana from other drugs. And again, those changes will be reflected in what our ad hoc committee looks at next Monday. Two other fairly quick things, both on page 26. We had a conversation around consent and non-consent. And the fact that statutorily minors are not able to consent. But we still believe that it's an important component of the plan, more so in terms of willingness as sort of factors for when minors come together. We're planning to make those changes to sort of move consent and non-consent out of the elementary version altogether, but we think that that is a more relevant conversation, especially at the secondary level, with whether or not the parties are sort of willing. Lastly, on page 26, you know that we've made some changes to consequences for recording things in school. And in particular, the language says that if you're recording physical aggression, which sort of mistakenly implies that you have to have a finding of physical aggression before that code can apply. And we'll be changing that to physical contact, which allows for even a serious play fight to sort of fit that description. The larger conversation that I think the board should have is one you've had before, and that is on page 25. You're all aware that we've combined fighting and physical attack.
Mine aren't numbered.
The top right-hand corner of your page. Are you looking at the grid itself? Okay. In the grid itself, we are on page.
Oh, never mind. I can go back to the other thing.
Grid itself, we're on page 14. And if you're looking at the actual plan itself, it's on page 25. We've combined fighting and physical attack, and we've retained language that's in our current policy now, which says self-defense is described as an action taken to restrain or block an attack by another person or to shield oneself from being hit by another person. Responsive action, such as hitting a person back, is not self-defense and will be considered as fighting. And we revisited this conversation around, is it okay to punch back? And if Quinn punches me first and I punch him back, am I justified because he hit me first? We know that this carries over into a much more serious conversation about repeated and prolonged bullying, where someone responds with physical aggression. And this really comes down to whether or not that should ever be condoned without any consequence. The suggestion was changing the word will be considered as fighting to may be considered as fighting. And we've had more conversation with our team and just feeling like that introduces a lot of discretion that teams might struggle with like in every fight, do we really want to consequence the student that fought back? And in some cases, the fighting back becomes more serious than the initial aggression. And so I'll just open it up and let you know that that was sort of the conversation our policy committee had.
The May suggestion was mine, and I think that understanding that it opens up discretion and that discretion has its negative and positive possibilities, and that, but I think that without the discretion, we're talking a zero tolerance policy.
Yeah.
And that has its negative consequences too. And I think that from the distance that we are at this table, to say that we should have zero tolerance for students who respond physically to the aggression of other students without knowing the particulars and just have a blanket statement around that, I don't think that's good for our students. I don't think it's good for our school climate. I don't think it's, and I think the May, and if we want to add some guidance around the May, right? Not just a simple may, but may in extreme circumstances, or may, and I've heard 2 or 3 things from school personnel, one from parents, about situations where, their kid was suspended for, after being viciously attacked for hitting back. And viciously attacked. And to me, I don't know what to say to that parent, except for, oh, that's our rule, we have zero tolerance for the kid hitting back. Doesn't fly with me.
Me either. Prerogative, and then
prerogative.
Never. I don't know how we can supersede someone's right to defend themselves. I've always had problems with that. So I think we should build something in to acknowledge that. And sometimes you just have to, otherwise it's going to get so bad. So I agree that I'm fine with May, because I don't think it's fair to have someone wailing on somebody and finally and the guy hits back, and then that person has to do that's like punishing everybody for the fault of one. I don't like that either. So I think May is good enough, perhaps with some other qualifiers. I'm not certain. Nikki?
Speaking, and I'm going to share something very personal. Speaking from a victim's point of view, as somebody who punched someone because they were trying to throw me down a staircase in the gym locker room, except the teacher heard the scream first. If we do those kind of rules, I'm the one suspended, yet they're the one who tried to kill me. I don't really think that I'm using the most extreme situation, but it is a true situation. And my situation is this. There are times when there's no way out. I'm not a violent person. I didn't want to do that. At the same point, there is something to be said about self-preservation, that I'd rather not suspend or expel someone for that reason.
Imad.
Yeah, I agree. I think if we're giving staff discretion, when we're talking about the levels of discipline, for example, like level 2 is may result in removal from class or in school suspension. I think we can, if we're doing that, we can also afford to use discretion when we're talking about the use of self-defense, because it just varies so much case by case. Yeah.
Isn't that where we landed?
Got any others?
I mean, isn't that where we landed with the May, is that, you know, we need school staff to make those value judgments. So I think we're actually saying where we landed.
Yeah.
So
Now, the recommendations from the committee do not include the May.
Yeah, they don't, yeah, we had lots and lots of conversation about it. As it's reflected now, it does not include it, but in principle, I think we agreed that teams, level 3 consequences 1 to 3, and the discussion we had is that there's discretion there as well, that this student gets a 3-day, that student gets a 1-day. What we hadn't quite landed on was that there may not be a consequence at all, but it's a very healthy conversation. I appreciate it.
Are you at all worried that where we introduce discretion, we also introduce more disproportionality in our interventions, or?
That's the concern. Yep.
I'll trust the people to figure out the difference, and it's not going to be some arbitrary decision. It has to be some discussion, some investigation on it, and I'm not going to assume that people can't do that. I'm going to assume the opposite, that our staff are fair, they can figure out who was right and what was wrong, and do it accurately almost all the time. I'll trust staff on that. So I really don't think we should limit that type of choice.
I'm okay either way, but I think I'm not in the majority, so.
Got any others, Chad? Anything else?
No, I think that kind of represents the bulk of the conversation we had, and so I think you've given us a lot to think about, and there are some changes that I think we're pretty clear that we'll make right away. Others we'll discuss with our ad hoc committee on Monday, and then we'll kind of also talk timeline. The hope was that we can make edits following tonight to discuss the edits with the ad hoc committee, and if we feel collectively pretty good that then that, so we're still 2 weeks away from the February meeting, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I think you got time, and we'll get this done in time in order to staff to work it. We're not starting over here. We're just making some changes and improvements. So thank you for all this extra work on top of some of your other daily schedules. Yeah, so appreciate it.
Seriously, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You guys need a break?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's let's come back at 10:02.
Thank you.
Okay,
do it,
folks.
absolutely.
Here's the deal. What we're going to talk about today is really what it actually is. It's called well, it's an overview. As one of our speakers suggested. It might be a little frustrating for some who expected more of an in-depth thing, and we've got questions and concerning, hey, how are we going to actually assess this? What you're really going to do? And unfortunately, we're going to get just the outline of that, not a lot of meat. So there is a weather concern tonight as well, which does not mean I want you guys to limit your comments, but be aware you might have a little hard time coming home. I know it's not snowing now, but it's gonna start, and we don't know how that works these days. So we got some stuff to do. Lisa, why don't you kick it off and introduce everybody up there so we all know what's up, and then you can kind of start walking us through this. And there'll be places to stop, the kind of natural places to stop on here where we can ask questions. But be aware that you all, they already got the emails asking for more of the details of it. If you can respond to some of that in your opening remarks, that would be helpful. It might limit some of the questions or it might give us an opportunity to be more concise in our questions to you, and or answer some of our questions prior. But they're already aware that we want more and soon. So take it from there.
Okay. Well, thanks for having us. This is my team up here, and we'll be providing you with an implementation update around each of our 3 major plans. I'll start with some introductions. Ethan Netterstrom is our Interim Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and also Director of Advanced Learning over the past year. You've seen him before. This is Leanne Bourne. She is our Interim Director of Advanced Learning, and we are most appreciative to both of these folks for stepping in when the Central Office needed them to fill some slots. Sylvia Romero Johnson, our Executive Director of the Office of Multilingual and Global Education, and then John Harper, our Executive Director of Educational Services. So tonight we're here to, like I said, share an implementation summary of each of our 3 major plans. Gives us an opportunity to reaffirm the purpose of why we wrote these plans actually in the first place. And we've organized the updates really around some common themes that we are holding ourselves accountable to in each of the plans. We'll also share our next steps as we move through the process of implementation. And we want to hear from you about what you would like to see different in the annual updates. When we were talking about the cycle of monitoring and evaluation, if you remember, we were here and you had said you wanted more robust yearly updates. So we have an opportunity later in the presentation to hear from you a little bit about that as well. So again, we have clearly stated plans for service delivery that, if you remember us talking about, really move beyond compliance and in federal mandates and actually articulate our vision for instructional excellence with each of these plans in each of these areas. So if I think back about why we wrote these, and lots of work obviously has gone into these. So we wanted to provide a clear vision for equitable access and opportunity. And we wanted to prioritize in the plan a set of a few high leverage actions that we thought were going to move the needle and make a difference for these groups of students. We actually have, interestingly enough, found that the plans have held us accountable to hear voice in staff, students, and families. And we wanted the plans to empower schools to make the best decisions possible around instructional design for each of these groups of students.
These are the plan summaries. I went back and looked at the simple table of contents for each of the plans, and we've learned a lot about how to write these and where we were emphasizing our work. So this is just a summary for you overall of what our plans contain. Certainly, to go into each plan in a great amount of detail would take separate meetings, but we want to be able to share with you some themes and some common areas. I do want to remind all of us that we have been sharing with you some of the work of the plans along the way, right? So just some examples. I know John and I have been here talking about the weighted student formula around special education. Sylvia is in the thick right now of the ELL plan external evaluation. We've heard from Ethan around, actually EL plan is less than a year old. We have provided updates around EOS and the advanced placement work. Not long ago we did a presentation on the OCR work that we've been doing, and as a reminder, we're coming back in April to talk about honors. So just wanted to remind folks that we certainly don't see this one meeting as the be-all and the end-all. We have an obligation to let you know along the way how plan implementation is going as well. So our first theme, as I mentioned earlier, is around communication and collaboration across the plans. And I will start, whoops, not too fast there. Start by saying that the plans have articulated a way for us to intentionally communicate and collaborate. And John is going to actually talk a little bit deeper on this slide, but I also want to say that our ELL plan that Sylvia is chairing has a really purposeful and concrete parent advisory committee that's formed and meets regularly. And then Ethan, as you know, as we have provided information around, his ELAC parent group has been meeting regularly. They've provided recommendations around the OCR work that we're doing. So you can see the highlights, some of the lessons we learned, what we're going to amplify and maybe increase doing, and then what our next steps are. So I'm going to take this approach with each of our slides, and on this slide I'm actually going to hand it off to John so he can talk a little bit about the work he's doing in special education.
First, I'll just begin with a theme that has emerged across all departments with plans is the use of parent advisories, which serves two broad functions. The first being gathering stakeholder input and experiences is simply a core practice in our respective efforts of continuous improvement. The second theme is that parent and family trainings are ongoing. We're never done with that. They're never ending, and they're a necessary component of providing direction to families in navigating the complex systems that we all are involved in. In terms of special education, I want to just share a number of the parent trainings that we have offered and continue to offer on an annual basis. The first being transitioning individuals with disabilities from high school to adulthood. So we partner with multiple agencies to provide family trainings on the guardianship process, Social Security, and the associated benefits, long-term supports through the Aging Disability Resource Center, or ADRC for short, the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, and multiple post-secondary education supports so that students and families are apprised of navigating through these complex waters, so to speak, and accessing services and supports into adulthood. We also offer on multiple times throughout the year unpacking the IEP process, which for many families that are with younger children, understanding the IEP process is very difficult. There are so many rules, regulations, and so forth. We offer small venue opportunities for parents to understand the IEP process, ask questions, and so forth. We are also providing targeted trainings for parents of ELLs, English language learners, to navigate both the systems of disability as well as other opportunities, and also for our Native American families. And lastly, I'd highlight our multiple opportunities for families on reading fundamentals specifically for students with disabilities. And we have primarily focused on multisensory reading strategies, in other words, providing interventions for students with dyslexia. So we have multiple trainings throughout the course of the year for families to understand the overall, like the reading process, as well as what they can do at home and what we do at school. So with that, I will turn it back to Lisa.
Are we allowed to ask questions at certain times, or do we wait till?
You got something, Nikki?
Yeah.
Yeah,
just
go ahead.
How often are the trainings held each year?
How often? So for the transition process, we have 6 different trainings for the transition process. We have, skipping around a little, for the reading intervention offerings, we do that about 4 times a year. For the targeted trainings for Native American families and English language learners, it has proven to be about 3 per year. And then unpacking the IEP process, we've offered that between 2 and 6 times a year.
Thank you.
TJ, you got something?
This is probably more than we want to spend tonight, so I just appreciate if you could send a description of the choosing outcomes and accommodations for children. That's a program pilot that I was not familiar with, and so, I mean, you can describe it quickly if you want now, but more background on that would be good.
Also, the student that I choose, could you say?
Yeah, the author, the architect of that is Michael Giangreco, who we had for he's a professor from University. So he was here for our special education plan kickoff. So this is in brief, this is a way to elicit information from the parents and the student, and kind of using that as kind of like futures planning. It's very much, it's a bit labor intensive on the front end, but it pays huge dividends on the back end. In other words, it provides very clear steps for staff at the school. So yes, so
I look forward to hearing more about it. Thank you.
And then the student-led IEP, could you send me some info on that?
Sure.
And actually, Lisa, you said to highlight things. I think that when we have new programs when the updates or acronyms that either are linked to things or things like that for future, highlight things for future update, right?
Yeah, I got it. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Thanks.
That thing.
So identification, there are components of identification in each plan, and it is really about this idea of getting the right students the services that they need to be successful. So I'll share a little bit about an emphasis in special education we want to highlight in advanced learning, and then Sylvia is going to talk a little bit about ELLs. So special education, we have really worked hard to emphasize really good identification, monitoring, and support for our earliest learners, early childhood. We've heard people say we want to get after those gaps early that we're seeing. We want to capture students who need earlier support so that they can be successful. So that's something that we've learned a lot about. We've learned the importance of outreach with families and collaboration with our Birth to 3 programs. It's also been great to have Colleen here in the Department of Early Learning, so she can partner as well with John's department around our littlest ones with special education needs. I would say identification for advanced learning, we've talked about that a lot. I think that we have really articulated and clarified an identification process. Both of these folks here to my left would say we are actually moving towards now not just identification, but also providing the right services in schools. So that's something that's an ongoing part of the Advanced Learning Plan implementation. I'm going to turn it over to Sylvia, and she's going to talk about their work around individual plans of service and the use of EduClimber.
Yes, thank you. The appropriate identification of students is important for each of our departments and each of our plans. For the ELL plan, we wanted to ensure that every student received an annual individual plan of service. The implementation of EduClimber and the transition to EduClimber gives us a functionality to be able to monitor the content of those IPS forms and to make sure that the quality is there and it reflects the services that students are receiving. Given that, we have strived to remove technical challenges from teachers so that they can focus on areas such as using IPS forms for the purpose of transitions from one level to another. And in addition to that, we have received feedback from parents in the ELL Plan Advisory Council, where they have indicated that they have appreciated knowing what an IPS form is, when they are supposed to get it, and how to use that for the purpose of supporting students. So based on that feedback, we want to make sure that all school-based staff have the information that they need to be able to engage our parents about that content.
Nikki, you had something?
Is there a way, I'm thrilled that it's being used for ELL, is there also a way to put behavior incidents in EduClimber for special ed so that parents can track it easier?
Well, EduClimber is our sole mechanism for tracking behavior. Yeah. Is it available to parents? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I don't believe that there is a parent portal. I don't think so.
Thank you.
Can we talk a little bit, I think it impacts all three of these plans, and more generally, the transition to EduClimber and the successes and the frustrations and kind of where we're at on that. I think that all three of your departments are trying to use it, and probably, and again, there's been some successes. I'm also sure that there's probably been some frustrations. So if you can kind of update the board on where we're at on that, that would be really useful. And from a general overview or the individual perspectives.
Sure. I can speak to it from the advanced learning lens a bit. Maria Martin, who's our teacher leader now in the department, has done a tremendous job of really working hard with our staff to get them transitioned over from OASIS to EduClimber and inputting the data. One of the things that we've been able to do with that is to separate the tier of support from the student. So in OASIS, it looked like the student was a tier, so you had a tier 1 student or a tier 2 student. And so being able to say this is a student and they need tier 1 supports, or this is a student and they need both a tier 1 support and a tier 3 support across different domains has been huge in being able to update the accuracy of our system. So from the advanced learning lens, it's really been very successful in that, and I think has improved what we've been able to see.
From the perspective of the ELL plan, I think it's been a major improvement. The initial implementation in OASIS gave us the opportunity to have electronic records of the IPS forms when we used to do them manually. While now the functionality of EduClimber will allow us to monitor across the district completion and be able to have reports around completion and then be able to look at quality. So it'll help us improve from that perspective.
Yeah, IEPs are still in OASIS. So it's sort of this, yeah, so I'll just leave it at that.
And will they always be in OASIS, I guess is the obvious question to follow up.
And I would say, I want to be brief with my comments here. When we wrote the request for proposal, you all saw that it was supposed to be really like replacing OASIS, the whole thing, with an IEP system. Oh wait, EduClimber was purchased by an outside entity, so they were acquired. They did not want the EduClimber to build an IEP system for us, so we were literally caught within weeks of that decision, and we were on the wrong side of that. So we have OASIS now. We already have plans for an internally derived product that will be very much exactly what we want, with many local stakeholders, our own teachers, providing input into them. So
keep us updated.
We won't always have OASIS.
I will say Sylvia's being very humble and not saying it. Sylvia and OMGE did a really beautiful job working with bilingual resource teachers and ESL teachers as they were learning about EduClimber. They established points of contact in buildings, gave extended employment, extended contract time to get that to happen. They were really, your support of those supplemental staff people in buildings, I know was really appreciated. So that case management, you guys, was a lift for people the first couple of years. I mean, the number of actual individual plans of service now in EduClimber versus before is quite incredible. It certainly was a lift, and I just want to make sure that you guys know that her department did a really nice job of supporting people in that lift. It was kind of a big deal. Moving on to curriculum and instruction, and that's a picture of Aida Walke. She was our keynote speaker when we launched the ELL plan and has done lots of training with our staff. So nice photo of her. So John's going to talk a little bit about curriculum and instruction and share a highlight on this, but I just wanted to share that Sylvia and her team are continuing to provide teachers with access to the high-quality training around guided language acquisition design, or GLAD, and also QTEL, the Quality Teaching for English Language Learners, at both the elementary and the secondary level. And schools and staff members have been really positively impacted by that and asking for more training. I know Ethan and Leanne, in terms of the curriculum development for advanced learners, are working on a course series for literacy in middle school and also developing supports K-8 around Tier 2 supports that are there. But I'm going to have John talk a little bit about the staff that have been trained around the multisensory approach to reading intervention, because that's really something to be proud of as well.
Very much. So a primary goal of the special education plan is to dramatically improve the literacy outcomes of students with disabilities. And maybe it's an understatement, but we feel that reading is a highly complex activity with no singular improvement strategy associated with it. Our plan is centered on both short-term and longer-term actions to develop the necessary systems and practices. And we have made significant progress in both, providing the tools and the necessary professional learning that goes with that. I want to highlight just a few things here. Our work on intervention matching has been very, very fruitful in terms of matching the right intervention with the student's disability-related need. Secondly, we've differentiated our interventions by level, by reading area, and disability type. For example, Edmark is a product that, or a curriculum that we use for individuals with more intellectual type disabilities. And lastly, we've invested heavily in both curricular materials and staff development in multisensory reading strategies targeting dyslexia. So you can see from the data here that we've doubled the number of staff trained that have this advanced skill, so to speak, in teaching reading, specifically to address dyslexia. And to give you some hard numbers, 5 years ago we had 0 teachers trained in Orton Gillingham or Sonde or Wilson or some of the more conventional multisensory reading strategies. Today we have 132. We have more than one staff at every single school except one. We have 49 of the 50 schools have at least 1 or 3 staff. Our goal is to have one staff train, at least one, at every single school. So we feel like we've made some serious progress there. Not only have we provided the training, but as I mentioned earlier, we provided the curriculum materials. So the materials that multiple staff are able to use to really target this area. This has been a persistent area of underdevelopment, and we're taking this very seriously, and we've made some major progress here.
Can you add something?
I just wanted to pause on the CNI piece for a minute. I think it's the piece that maps best to in the AL plan, the kind of priority area 2, which is developing tiered supports across all 5 advanced learning domains. And I wondered, can you guys just comment a little bit? There were 3 priority actions under there, and I'll just name them so nobody has to go back to look. They're somewhat straightforward. The first was around infrastructure, which kind of was around clustering and curricular design, so like the compacted math sequences, etc. The second was developing curriculum. And then the last was around tiered supports. Can you maybe just verbally comment a little bit on where we're at across the domains with that? And I appreciate, like, we don't need to go through K5 by 5, middle school by 5, but I just...
Yeah, so the clustering one was actually on the next slide in professional learning.
Oh, sorry, I jumped
No, that's okay. So we piloted it out with 4 schools, not school-wide at first, but working with different grade levels and really helping the teacher teams dig into what those practices mean. We had giant schools and some other experts come out to the district last year and work with us in the schools.
Which schools?
Olson, Albion, Lowell, Shorewood, those 4. And then we have more schools this year who are in a leadership creativity type of pilot that will tie into that. So we'll embed that. We'll embed the clustering in that also this year. So that's what we've done this year, and checking with the schools and supporting. And when we have our spring set of data, taking a look and seeing how do those specific grade levels at those schools fare compared to the same grade levels across the board, and see if we see differences or not. As far as advanced course sequences, we're working on the literacy one now. So the CNI and TJ's technology team and the ALSs have been meeting. This will be our 3rd one this week. Going out and looking at personalized learning is one of the things. Enrichment is another model, and then more of a compacted sequence. We're looking at those 3 and figuring out which of those kind of structures best lends itself to for Tier 3 literacy for kids with advanced needs. So looking at that as a structure, but then figuring out also what kind of content and materials go in. So whether it's like William and Mary curriculum or other pieces that we're using or developing or meshing together. So that's all in progress.
And
the
that's
idea.
That's
the middle school.
That's middle school.
Yeah, and the idea is to pilot that at a couple of schools this coming year. What's the 3rd piece? Tiered supports. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So with tiered supports, we're working with K-5 right now in both math and literacy to develop really strong Tier 1 supports, building out what are the extensions already available in things like Bridges for math, and then what do we need to do to take it a step beyond that for students where those challenges that are already built in isn't enough. And then similar work happening in literacy in partnership with CNI as well, and we'll have again our 3rd meeting on that on Friday this week. And then really once we've identified where does Tier 1 take us to, then we can plan more robust supports around Tier 2. We continue to have what we've had in the past in terms of programming in Tier 2, but we know that we need to ramp that up once we have clearly defined Tier 1 and the needs there.
I mean, maybe to ask it a different way, it'd be really helpful to have like a table of just what we're doing, as it feels like we're piloting a few things. I'm thrilled that we're piloting. I'm thrilled that we're kind of meeting to define curricular sequences, et cetera. And it's 4 grades across 32 elementary schools by 5 grades, right? And so there's a lot of kids that aren't seeing access to that. Same thing in terms of what's the curricular support that's actually being supporting those kids' education, right? So it sounds like we've got a couple of pilots on clustering, but maybe not a curricular sequence to support instruction for those kids. So just like piece it together for us, and in terms of where we're at, and a little bit of a timeline in terms of next steps would be really helpful. I mean, I think like I am continually eager for faster progress here, and certainly like the many families in our district would be as well. So I'd love to have that be a public document so that we could just calibrate where we're at compared to the commitments we made. So I don't know, we can share that at another instruction work group or something. But
to add to Kate's thing, not to create more work for you guys, please, I understand you're incredibly busy. Is there a way we could get a list of the pilots that we're doing? Each year, look at a chart, what we're doing? So that way we could just keep in touch with what the pilot is, what the schools are, what our results are, and when they're done? Is that doable?
It depends on how we define school level pilots versus district level. I'm assuming you mean district level.
I mean, which grades are, like, which schools it's in?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's at least 2 or 3 pilots in here that I hadn't heard of before, so I think, but more generally, I just, kind of piggybacking on Kate a little bit, I think that, again, to Lisa's initial question, what kind of things do we want in updates and monitor and things like that, and I think that Kate kind of described something that is almost universal in that. And then I understand that this is, this isn't that. This is something different that we're doing tonight. But if we're going to try and learn that, I guess, and then a kind of specific question, which is, in the identification, the increase in leadership and creativity is highlighted. In terms of curriculum and services, where are we at? If we're identifying more students for creativity and leadership, once we've put that in their EduClimber file, what happens next, and where are we at on that?
So there are a few things that we're doing. One is we're partnering with Summer School to offer some supports in summer school this year, actually. So we'll be offering a creativity summer school piece for first graders who are identified through teachers' observation of potential in students, and then a leadership opportunity for sixth graders, rising seventh graders. So we're really excited about that possibility. And then we're also going to be working with, let's see, it's New Mundo, Kennedy, Lapham, Midvale, Franklin, Chavez, and tentatively Gompers and Hegel as well, to do a 2-day workshop around community problem solvers, which is an offshoot of Future Problem Solvers that's currently housed only at Hamilton, but has been something that Hamilton families have been really excited about for a long time. So we'll be working with the Future Problem Solvers folks to offer some strategies from those curricula to be able to infuse into regular classroom instruction so that it's part of the regular school day in terms of developing leadership for students. And then we're also looking at some arts integration training as part of that 2-day work.
That what you said there just reminded me of the program that was being done at Mendota, and my friend Rebecca Kemble was involved in that with Community Solve. They looked at issues around homelessness and a variety of other things, and actually presented to city committees, 4th and 5th graders, and I hope that's on your radar. And I also hope that in some ways there's historically been a lot of equity problems around, and actually a lot of cultural problems around future problem solvers. And I think that the Mendota example, if you can, and I'd be glad to put you in touch with Rebecca, who was a community person who was involved in it, to get the outside perspective, and I'm sure you're in touch with the people at Mendota, but I would really kind of strongly push that. Amazing young people, and amazing, I mean, they just did, it was the kind of leadership and also community service involvement things that was just a wonderful model.
And that's also, I want to say, part of why we're looking at community problem solvers rather than the future problem solvers piece, because that is student driven, and so students identify a community problem and then work
This is very much along those lines, and I can't remember what it was called. So, but
I actually saw it. It was very impressive.
So thank you for that.
Kate?
I mean, I maybe was just going to key off the word support is used a lot in this discussion and in some of the writing here. And I guess part of what I'm looking for from an update is we made a set of commitments in a plan, and those commitments for all of these are supported by state statute in different ways, or federal. And I want to just remind us that in advanced learning like this, the state statute requires school boards to provide access to an appropriate program, and an appropriate program is defined as a systematic and continuous set of instructional activities. So we're not talking about like after school programs here. We're talking about something that a child identified in kindergarten can have access to for potentially 12 years. That is instructional in nature. So I appreciate that the word support comes from MTSS. There's a reason that we're using it. I sometimes think it leads us towards something that is a different intervention or activity than A is our obligation by law, and B is our kind of responsibility by who we want to be for our kids. So I know I've said it before, and I appreciate that you guys already know this, but it's, we built a plan that should be leading us towards a systematic set of instructional activities, which is, we're not where we're at, so.
I am taking notes, much much of what we're talking about right now is already feedback to what I think we want. I hear you guys saying that you want to see in the yearly monitoring updates, so just know I'm kind of capturing some of what you're saying, and when we get to that slide, I think that we'll have some information already out there.
So before we go forward, I want to back up something that, sorry, it came up now, but to the parent advisory committees. Each of the 3 departments have a staff assigned to organize these things and keep on top of it, because we know we know that if you don't do these things properly, there are things to do to organize these things where it doesn't turn out to be the same old people coming again, and the go-tos. You actually outreach more to, especially, well, in all 3 of your areas, to people that don't ever get contacted, and make sure that they get not asked, sent a letter, or asked just once, but repeatedly. Do all 3 of you have that same type of system in place to outreach to your different constituencies so that you continually go after them, even if they tell you, no, I don't want to do this? That, to me, that's always says, well, not yet. You know, so, you know, it's not like a, no, stop calling me. That means, okay, I won't call you tomorrow, but I'll call you next week. So you got to, you know, that type of persistency. Do you have those structures in place? And then, yeah, you all saw me talking with Michelle, going, well, you know, are you know, this is what their department does, because we've had problems with that in the past where we just get the same people coming all the time, and you hear the same stuff, and you're just an echo chamber. So to get some real honest feedback, are you really using, just, you don't have to, I mean, I'm just telling you, make sure you're doing that properly and stay persistent with it.
Yeah, I'd say that's what we've been doing this year. I think we've had a lot larger showing for the Advanced Learning Committee. I think part of it is that it's tied to the OCR resolution, and we're making concrete recommendations. So it's a good hook or investment for people. We've worked with, you know, Ford Madison, 100 Black Men, Latino Education Council, what was our other one? A couple of other groups. And then from FICE, we've had Cesar's helped us with some outreach, and Emily. So we've definitely had more people showing up. GSAFE was our other one. So, and also some community folks. And we've moved around where we've offered the sessions so they're not all at the same school or at Doyle. So we're getting different folks to come out too. I say this year has been a lot more engagement than in years past, and we've specifically, you know, called, mailed, written, gone to specific folks who are situated in the community to represent more input than just themselves. And MPAL is always a great partner in with that as well, bringing out voices. So I feel like we've been doing a pretty good job with that.
Well, those are good groups, but this is a parent advisory group. So, you know, the families that are involved are going to change every year. So the outreach has to start over every year, and it's fresh, and that's a whole new thing than talking with someone that you've been talking to for several years. So that relationship building starts, critical part starts at the upfront, so you can draw them in with their child throughout their whole student career, and the family too. So that engagement part is critical in all 3 of your separate areas. Okay.
Yeah, for our subgroup, for our community, we rely very heavily on the relationships that bilingual resource specialists have directly with parents and take their recommendations. And for our subgroup also, there are many barriers to access that we try to mitigate. We provide childcare, for example, for the Mexican community, dinner. We provide different ways to remove all of the barriers so parents can participate. And we do reach out to parents of different language backgrounds as well as levels. And then it's interesting because out of that group and out of feedback that we get, offshoot different work sometimes gets started. For example, because of the committee, we started working specifically with West High School and the ESL department, and specifically families who speak Hmong at home that live in the Bayview area. to be able to have greater access to West High School and work, be able to go to all of the parent meetings at West High School. And we brainstormed many different ways that we could remove those barriers for the school level. So it's interesting work that comes out of many of these parent committees.
Okay. I am going to go on to professional learning, and just want to talk a little bit about, we found as we have written these plans that there is some necessary professional learning that's targeted to the unique needs of the adults and students who benefit from these services. So Ethan and Leanne are going to take this, but first I wanted to draw out that John and his special ed department have been working hard with our building-based PSTs to provide professional development at the school sites for building-based staff and special ed assistants. We actually have a pretty unique model in Madison to have program support teachers at buildings, and we're working to build their capacity to do that in schools to help those case managers and SEAs develop the right kinds of environments and supports for students. And then Sylvia's department has worked really hard to develop the biliteracy scopes for the 50-50 models, and are going through a series of iterations and edits and regrounding our bilingual teachers in really the good guidance that those scopes provide. So those are some examples of sort of plan-specific professional learning that's happening. And I'm going to turn it over to Ethan and Leanne to talk a little bit about professional development for advanced learning.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about the clustering already, but some of the other things we've been working on was our PD for the advanced learning specialists, so really providing them more training around coaching and teacher team supports, and so supporting children and adults also, so we'll have a larger reach. So definitely been doing that. Last year was where we pulled out the ALS to go to the district-wide coaching sessions. This year we've taken an embedded approach, so the existing ALPD sessions embedding folks from the coaching professional learning department to help us do that with them and take a look at their schedules and figure out where can you have the greatest impact, not just tier 1 with the supports, but also where can you still pull kids to do some direct service too. So both of those pieces. As far as some specific PD, again, we touched on the EduClimber earlier, where we've been doing labs for our staff, and so they're all up to date on how to use it, what it looks like, and doing that with Fidelity. Also things such as acceleration. So we've been looking at our acceleration practices and how we use the Iowa scales, and working with Wendy from the psych department and Nick from MTSS to make sure that we have a similar approach across all of our schools when we're looking more proactively at our outliers each spring. So we've been doing that more recently. And then the leadership creativity pilots and early adoption that we're working on, that's coming up, the 2 PD days in April and May with our schools. So that's some of the main pieces that are coming. What am I missing? Nothing. I rambled through it all.
Can you speak to, the ALS role from a direct service perspective has both kind of tier 2 and 3 intervention, as well as, or at least my understanding, as well as talent development in terms of kind of kids that we want to support accelerated learning for. Those are relatively different things. So one would be beyond grade level instruction, and one would be kind of faster paced instruction.
Yeah.
How is our PD supporting those 2 things differently?
You want to talk through the talent development? Okay, so for our more traditional non-talent development identified kids, I'm trying to think of the word, not talent development, it's more of similar to what we've done, Wickedy for tier 3, some of the pull-out groupings, or within where ALS is pushed into classrooms and support specific groups, whether it's like again with the William and Mary or Socratic Seminar or Beast Academy for Math, or whatever it happens to be. So the talent development piece is where it's been at this point more of the tier 1 development, where we're helping teachers to work with kids that we've identified and provide them, whether it's extensions that we're building into the scopes and sequences, or some direct contact with the kids. But that's definitely the area where we're trying to grow, because it's a new area for us. and we're really working at it as we go. When you're looking at the staffing, it's hard to figure out, depending on the building, what % of time is done with each. So it looks a little different in each, depending on the populations.
Something
yeah.
I'd jump in on with that is that the with the school level implementation plans, what we're able to start seeing is which advanced learning specialists have strength areas in talent development and which are really, you know, having these strength areas more around coaching, and who is having strength areas around more of the tier 2 supports. And so trying to think through where is the strength in our existing staff and how can we leverage that strength to help support each other across the department, I think is where we want to see our PD lead as a main next step.
Go ahead.
If we're talking about just with advanced learning, is if we're talking tier 1 support, is the domains for creativity and leadership something that teachers are responsible for in the classroom, or is that more of outside support, since it's not something that's typically taught as much as like math or literacy?
Yeah, so since those are, the way I think about it or frame it is that those are more process domains, right? So they're not a content area in and of themselves, but they're a way that you can approach any content. And so my thinking is that teachers are responsible for those across content areas, and there are some content areas that lend themselves more easily than others to one or the other, right? Like leadership sort of naturally lives in things like civics or, you know, public speaking. Those kinds of pieces really bring that leadership piece forward. Creativity naturally lives in math or the arts, creative writing, right? So I think across domains, those are places that we want to make sure that we draw those out. In terms of tier 1, I think the main body of work is to develop what do we want to make sure that all students have access to in leadership, and what do we want to make sure that, what kinds of experience do we want all students to have access to in terms of creativity across their K-12 experience.
I think I would also add, because I've been spending so much time on this with Ethan and the C&I department, is this commitment that we made in the strategic framework to historically accurate, culturally responsive, and inclusive curriculum that, right, finding these talents that students have, regardless of domain. It is also about finding those in places and in classrooms where students are engaged and the conditions are set so that they can build on the strengths that they have and feel valued and affirmed in a classroom. So I do think that it isn't just something that the advanced learning department is taking on their own, and we've made a commitment to that in the framework to look at creating those conditions in classrooms that allow students to thrive and bring their experiences and see their accurate experiences reflected in the classroom. So I just wanted to be sure that I mentioned that. Okay. Transitions. We're going to talk a little bit about supporting student transitions next. And in case I haven't said it before, we actually have a whole cross-functional team and a priority project around student transitions. Carol Anderson-Gillis leads it. It is a cross-functional team of different departments. I'm going to have Ethan and Leanne talk a little bit about this, but I want to share a little bit about the specific transition strategies between John and also Sylvia's department. So John's been working specifically on multiple transition strategies to post-secondary and amplifying what we've talked about before actually is the transition project, the priority project that's been moving across levels, so elementary to middle and middle to high. And then also at a more micro level, students coming to school in the beginning of the year and transitioning well for the first day. Want to share that Sylvia's work around transitioning, because we have better data in EduClimber with IPS forms, we have a lot, we actually have something now to talk about when students transition between levels, because those individual plans of service are actually electronic and we can gather them and share them from school to school. So those would be two, I think, actually successes that we've had in the plans that we've intentionally developed. And I'm going to have Ethan talk a little bit about some transition work around advanced placement, I think, and equal opportunity schools and what we've been doing to get kids ready for those kinds of experiences.
So we've been partnering with equal opportunity schools for the last couple of years, and this year we have a different partner on their end. It's been very easy for us to work with at the schools. So Leanne and I have been going out to the schools with them and leading conversations with their equity teams, principals, APs who are in charge of advanced placement, meeting with student panels and really getting a feel for what's happening at the school level, and what are some potential barriers and what are some access points that we might have overlooked. So that's what we've started doing. Leanne, if you want to elaborate a bit.
Just also, I think it's important to note that the schools have been doing really tremendous work around creating some very robust outreach plans, and so they're doing very intentional work in connecting with underrepresented students and guiding them into these courses that are a match for their academic interests, and they can see the students' specific academic interests on their student insight cards. So they're having conversations with trusted adults, they're having student panels where students talk to each other about AP coursework and honors coursework and what it means to take on those challenges and what you will need to do to be successful and prepared. And so, you know, we're seeing some really strong success with this across the board. We saw from 2016-17 a rise from 23% of our students who are both Hispanic, Latinx, and also from low-income households. It went from 23% participation in 16-17 to 47% participation this school year. So that's in a 2-year period. And similarly, our Black and African American students who are from low-income households went from 17% to 32% over that same 2-year period. So we're seeing a strong rise in that participation, and then looking at the testing results and the pass rates, we're seeing similar success over time. Not as much success in the first AP exam, but by the second AP exam that students take in those underrepresented groups, they're showing strong success of pass rates at 3 or higher with 71%.
Can you just repeat those? Are you saying 32% of our AP students are African American?
No.
What?
I'm saying that of our 11th and 12th grade African American students,
okay,
in 2016-17, 17% of them took AP classes.
Took an AP class.
And, yeah, 1 or more AP classes. And in this school year, 32% of that same demographic.
And what are the absolute numbers?
I don't have that in front of me. I would have to look. Sorry. I can get that in the report.
Yep.
Raised a couple of things, which is you say that students who take the second AP pass rates are fine. Out of the students from the underrepresented groups who take the first AP exam, what percentage take the second one?
That's a great question. I can pull that number also.
Appreciate that. And then just kind of a more general question. I think this is for Lisa, or just a statement, which is that I'm really happy to hear that there's a more generalized transition project going on across discipline and across areas. And I just want to make sure that in addition to traditional transitions between school levels and transitions to alternative programs and things like that, that transitions involving our highly mobile students are more, that the kind of supports that students need at the start of the school year, these students often need multiple times during the year, and that they really that they're integrated into it, because that's yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we are going to shift to accountability and data use, and here's our EduClimber and subsequent company Illuminate that we're working with. So it has been interesting as we have moved forward with the implementation of the plans, right? It's this balance of accountability and compliance that come with each of these plans, and also high program quality, right? It's both of those. Right. And we're trying, you can imagine if you're a school getting sort of accountability documents from each of the people in the 3 major plans, and you're trying to run a school really well, it can feel really overwhelming. So we are trying to find, I will be honest with you, we are trying to find a balance with that. and that's something that we're trying to integrate with the new SIP development. You'll hear more about that coming, but just wanted to acknowledge that as a real challenge that we're facing moving forward. So Sylvia is going to talk a little bit about this, but let me highlight a little bit here first. First of all, John has worked really hard and is in great partnership actually with our chiefs of schools, Nancy and Alex. We have a regular routine of meeting with the chiefs around actually the accountability plans that we have developed at all of the levels. We regularly check in around data and are finding that actually to be really helpful this year. We think that has really gotten some traction to have significant improvements in compliance at the school level. And I know, as you've heard before, Ethan and Leanne talked about the advanced learning school level implementation plans that have given us some data and metrics to monitor, and that was our first go out the gate at school level implementation plans, and we have certainly learned a lot with that, and we'll continue to refine that moving forward, and as schools actually have the capacity to do some of that on their own too, right, without having sort of a check off in a list. So I'm going to have Sylvia talk a little bit about the fidelity and the planning they've been doing around accountability and data use.
Yes, in order to provide coherence and alignment, our department has developed a school level implementation tool that articulates the expectations of an effective ELL program. And it also guides schools in making decisions to increase fidelity in public implementation. We are in a year where we're getting input from schools on the design of the tool as a way to inform instructional design. And because schools have an active role in the implementation of this tool, we already see that we will have an opportunity to share promising practices across schools. And then next year, also informed by the ELL plan evaluation recommendations, we will be able to implement to more schools and all schools.
So next steps, right? We will continue to implement and evaluate based on our established timelines. We were on a 3-year cycle of review, and when we discussed a bit ago about refreshing that document, we moved to a 5-year cycle, and I have that to share with you in the next couple slides. All of our teaching and learning departments engage in department level reviews of data, and then as a larger teaching and learning team, we have our own routines around performance management. And then that last one is chatting a little bit with you, as I had said earlier, about clearer expectations and outcomes for the revised yearly updates. And we'll have an opportunity to talk about that next. So Dean, I'll pause here. If there's anyone that has to offer any questions based on the updates in those theme areas, or I can move forward.
Anybody? Gone. Go forward.
Oh, that was quick. All right, so this is cut and pasted right from our Cycles of Ongoing Review and Evaluation document for all of our major plans. Sylvia, as we said, is in the midst of actually a timeline and data collection around an external review for the English Language Learner Plan. You can see that the next one up is actually special education. So John and I will be working together to put an RFP together to get some feedback. I know it seems like that crept up pretty quickly, but then you can see where those evaluations, monitoring, and updated plans fall. We have our work cut out for us, obviously, over the next 5 years, but this was a visual about what we agreed to. So the monitoring year updates. We had heard from you that you would like to have a more robust approach to the monitoring year updates. I actually do have copies here of the 16-17 updates. So these would be the ones that you got, not this past fall, but the fall prior, so that you can see there is, I'm going to get you guys to hand these out. There is a narrative, updates from the plan owners, and then there's also a data section around achievement and demographics. So I captured some feedback from you already, and interested in what else you might be thinking.
Can I go back to the last page really briefly? I just was looking at the dates.
Yeah.
So the existing AL plan goes 17 to 20. That would mean that we would have a new plan in 21, right?
So that goes that way. Oh, thanks.
So, right, so we had the 3-year cycle. I think this is a move to 5 years, so I guess we would.
So basically de facto, you're saying our existing AL plan it turned into 17 to 21, 22?
So.
I mean, what we passed was 17 to 20.
Yeah.
Yep.
Revisit it at that point.
So, Kate, let me revisit that with them. It was there. We had that 1 year sort of
Semi-pause.
Yeah, we had like a pause, and then we did a 1 year, and then we did an extension of the plan. Ethan,
To 20, yeah.
It went to 20.
Yeah, I mean the cover of it. I have it up on my
20.
computer. It's
Yeah.
still 20.
Yeah, right.
So this looks like there's a 2-year gap between the end of the plan and having a new plan.
So we can certainly take that back and discuss that.
Nice catch.
Yeah.
Moved
Yeah.
one, Lisa? Okay.
I did, yeah. We can check with research and evaluation about that as well, just so we can get the details about why that evaluation report box is there. You would have to actually start,
Next year.
right? You'd actually have to start in the fall of 2020 on the advanced learning plan. You'd have to do the RFP for it, so that it was
Special ed.
written in 2020, for the report to come out in 2021, for implementation
Yeah.
then in 2022. Like, that's actually the sort of boots on the ground, how that would actually happen. You actually have to get started the year before the green box.
And it would be on the same timeline as the special education plan then.
Look, I'm raising it because we currently have a 3-year plan, so I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page there.
You have a good point.
Actually, the special ed would be 1 year earlier.
1 year earlier?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we just might want to revisit the whole table.
Yeah, I'll check with Paul and make sure that our thoughts are.
Evaluation report would be fall 2020. Are you calling on me?
Yeah.
Lisa's question about kind of what we want in monitoring reports.
Yep.
And it's a really hard question to answer, partially because the 3 different plans and all the plans have their own unique aspects of it. And so I guess I'd like to approach it more as, how should we have the communication before monitoring reports are finalized? And what I can see is that since, there's 2 or 3 different ways that can do it, is that either outlines or draft reports. Outlines meaning this is what we intend to include. Draft reports meaning this is our first swipe at what we intend to do, being provided to the board either through weekly updates for feedback, or perhaps in a context like tonight's meeting, and saying, this isn't the final report, but this is swipe 1, or this is the outline of what we have in it, and having feedback received that way, and I think that would avoid the looking at something and going, well, and seeing it for the first time and going, well, this leads to that question, or this is really important and it's missing. So, and I also think just kind of maybe, if we do the outline thing, a checklist of these are the actions that are in the plan. This is being left out of the monitoring. This is how we are addressing it in the monitoring, and just kind of going through and sharing that checklist, both with somebody mentioned with the public, but also with the board, so that this is, that this is what the plan said we were going to do. That piece is going to wait for the evaluation. This piece is something that we're going to give you a monitoring piece on, and just being very explicit about the relationship between the monitoring report and the plan itself. So that's kind of my idea, and whether we have those discussions, I think that if we are trying to juice up the monitoring, I think doing at least one plan in instruction work group would be good, to walk through it and talk about it before it's finalized, and then say, and I don't think we have to do all of them, but I think that kind of finding that comfort level with each other in person around a table, as opposed to through random emails, or hey, X is really interested in that, I'll have a meeting with them about it. I just think that doing it at least once around the table would be good. So that's my opinion of a process, not a product, but a process.
So, I think these plans are pretty clearly written, and so to some degree the monitoring for me, and TJ, you may totally disagree with this, but for me, you could articulate, we say in the plan what we're going to do, and the monitor could be saying, here's what we did. It doesn't need to be results. Results are going to be really hard to see year to year, and I think that some of what drives the timeline is testing and results, etc. I'd rather be able to see something early enough that we could say, like, okay, great, we're running these pilots, but we're only, like, we're running pilots here, K-5, but we are only doing curricular updates in middle school. Maybe we should focus all in one area and do that. So I think it could be very process-oriented in terms of, literally, we said we were going to do this, here's what we're doing, and leave the kind of analytics, or at least the more robust analytics for the 3-year reports. So I don't know.
I think you need some outcomes, and I also think what you define as outcomes when you go back to the AL plan is that, how many what percentage of Tier 2 students are receiving direct services? Is that a process thing, or is that an outcome question?
I'm way more interested in just, is there a K-5 literacy curriculum that's for advanced learners? And is there a K-5 math sequence for advanced learners? And is there a leadership program during the school day that every one of our K-5 schools has access to for kids identified as advanced in leadership? I think the outcomes on the back of that is something that is incredibly nuanced, and so the work is work we have to do to build something, and I'm more interested in if we're building it and if kids are using it. And then after 3 years, if it's impacting educational outcomes. So I just
want to point out that there is a different, outcomes is one thing, but also whether students are, that if we have a K-5 science AL curriculum there, and it's sitting on a shelf and no students are accessing it.
Yeah, that's fair.
I bet that's something that's
it's fair. Yes.
Different.
I would
than
like to know
outcomes,
that kids
but
are using it on a daily basis.
Well, right.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the in-between thing. Okay, we understand.
Yeah, but that's not relying on test scores. That's not relying on waiting for.
But I'm saying that that's part of outcomes too.
It's fair.
You guys good?
Yeah. No, but we can move on.
All right. Anybody else got anything? Lisa, any questions you asked of us? Anybody here have questions of them yet? Go ahead, James.
Before we leave the monetary report, what I remember is that we put so much emphasis on how important they were, and that's the direction we were heading. So, I don't have any answers at this point in terms of what goes in there, or should go in the monetary report, but I think we should be as open as possible.
Yeah.
In terms of the inclusion of the information that's in those reports. But at this time, I couldn't say exactly what should go in them. But we should be as open as possible as what this outcome, the processes of what happened. We shouldn't, at this stage of the conversation, we should be eliminating.
Lisa, can you talk specifically about next steps for drafting up the monitoring reports and getting ourselves on a cycle?
And whoever, maybe we should have some of these community groups also input.
Yes.
I would love that.
Right.
So our initial thoughts on this were to take this feedback and to work with Andrew and his team to mock something up for an annual report for this spring, actually. Give you an opportunity to respond to it based on the feedback you've given, what we have mocked up, and then get on a regular routine of fall updates, right? That you really needed them in the fall. But we wanted to get your feedback. We thought, let's try to put something together for the spring. You guys could respond to it, and then we'll do another formal update with your feedback to that in the fall. That's what our initial thinking was. Yeah, then we at least have some iterations that we can try and then get on a regular routine, right? We want to do it sooner rather than later in the fall. So if there are adjustments to be made during the year, we can do it based on what we're seeing in the data. So that was our initial thinking. So I appreciate your feedback to that around specifics.
Okay. I guess we're good, huh? Thank you, you guys.
Thanks, you
And
guys.
we're probably going to see you individually at some point, but thanks for all coming together and appreciate it. So I'll move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All in favor? Imad?
Aye.
Everybody else? Meeting adjourned.
Oh my God.
I sent you an email along with the board regarding the whole pilot thing.
And so I think